Fan service. By Void and Velvet. He read it back. Read it again. Made 2 small edits. Condition specifically designed to was a little clunky, and the parenthetical about sin was tipping from affectionate into the territory of slightly too much, which was a line he'd spent 6 years calibrating. He posted it. The counter ticked up immediately, the way it always did on anniversary posts. The Novarchive account had 230,000 followers now, which is a number Dominic had spent the first 3 years not looking at directly, like staring at the sun. He'd started the account at 21 because he had a lot of feelings about Nova's debut and nowhere to put them. And somewhere between year 2 and year 3, it had become a thing people actually came to, which was gratifying and also occasionally alarming. He leaned back in his chair. The noodles were extremely cold by now. The apartment was small and in a neighborhood that was technically up and coming, which was a real estate phrase that meant affordable until it wasn't. And Dominic had lived in it for 4 years and done almost nothing to make it feel like he intended to stay. The furniture was fine. The kitchen was functional. There was a bookshelf that held his actual books and a second bookshelf that held his camera equipment and editing hard drives, and the walls had the Nova posters and one print of a photograph he'd taken himself, a blur of stage lights from a concert 3 years ago, which was the only piece of decor that was entirely his. He was good at making other people's spaces look considered. His own looked like a moving box that had never quite gotten unpacked. His phone was charging across the room. He'd been avoiding it since 8 p.m., when Aisha had sent a voice note that was either 6 minutes long or 8 minutes long. He'd seen the timestamp before the screen went dark, and he was fairly certain he knew what it was about, because he'd made the mistake of mentioning the application 2 weeks ago in a moment of what he could only describe as temporary insanity. The application, right? He'd seen the posting in March, which was 3 months ago, which meant he'd had 3 months to forget about it. And he'd almost managed to do exactly that except for the part where he'd filled out the entire form at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday and hit submit before he could think about it properly. Temporary social media manager for Novus World Tour. 8 months, beginning in June. Full creative oversight of the group's social channels across all platforms. The salary was listed, and it was very good, and the requirements were a portfolio of relevant work and 3 professional references, which meant the relevant portfolio was 6 years of Novarchive content, and the relevant references were the 3 brand account managers he'd contracted for in the last 2 years. He had applied for a job managing social media for the K-pop group he had been running a fan account about for 6 years. He had done this while wearing socks with a hole in the left toe and eating cereal at 2 in the morning, which was not, he felt, the auspicious origin story the position deserved. But it didn't matter because he wasn't going to get it. The label got hundreds of applications for positions like this. He'd submitted it as a kind of exercise, a proof of concept for what the portfolio could do, and he'd feel good about the process and then move on and continue writing captions in the dark for an account that wasn't his job and keep doing the brand contract work that was. That was the plan. That was a reasonable plan. He'd written the anniversary caption. He'd done his actual job. He was going to go eat his cold noodles and read himself to sleep, and in the morning everything would be the same as it had been yesterday. His email notification went off. He heard it from across the room, the specific chime he'd set for his professional address, the one he'd attached to the application. He did not get up. He looked at the CN poster for a moment. The photograph was from the spring magazine spread, CN in a black coat, looking slightly to the left of the camera with the particular quality of not quite smiling that his fans have been writing dissertations about for the better part of a decade. Dominic had read those dissertations. He had contributed to at least 2 of them, anonymously, in comment sections. The email chime was still sitting there in his chest, a small, insistent thing. He picked up his cold noodles. He ate 4 bites without tasting them. He put the bowl back down. He was fine. He had a system. The system worked. He was going to finish his noodles and go to sleep, and in the morning he was going to open the email, and it was going to be a polite form rejection, and he was going to feel the small, survivable sting of it and move on, and that was going to be that. If he had gotten the job, which he hadn't, he probably wouldn't even take it. He told himself this with the calm, complete conviction of someone who was absolutely lying, and then he went to bed. Chapter 2. Fan Behavior. He did not open the email in the morning. He opened it at 11:17 a.m., After 2 cups of coffee and one failed attempt at starting a caption for a brand account that sold ergonomic desk accessories, which was the kind of work that paid his rent and which he was very professional about, and which had produced, this morning, a total of 40 words, none of which he liked. He stared at the subject line for 45 seconds before he clicked it. Then he closed the laptop because his brain needed a moment to do something with what he'd just read. He made more coffee. He didn't need more coffee. He drank it anyway, standing at the kitchen counter, looking at the middle distance. He opened the laptop again. The email was still there. The email was going to keep being there. He had not been rejected. The email was not a rejection. The email was, in fact, an invitation to a preliminary interview, which was the specific phrase that appeared in the third line of the third paragraph. And Dominic had read that paragraph 4 times, and it kept saying the same thing, which meant he had done it wrong. He had applied for a joke, a proof of concept, a 2 a.m. Tuesday exercise in what the portfolio could theoretically do, and somehow the portfolio had done the thing. He closed the laptop. He opened his voice note app and stared at Aisha's unlistened message from last night, the one that was 6 minutes long. He put his phone down without listening to it. He picked it up and recorded his own voice note, which went like this. So I opened the email. It's a preliminary interview request, which is not a rejection, so that's HM. That is a thing that has happened. A pause. I don't know why I'm telling you in a voice note and not a call. I think I'm not ready for you to have real-time reactions to this. Another pause, longer. I might delete this. I'm not deleting this. Aisha, they want to interview me. For the actual job. For a real interview at their actual offices. He stopped again. He could hear himself breathing. I'm going to listen to your voice note now. He listened to the barista situation, which was ongoing and involved someone named Theo who may or may not have been putting extra espresso shots in Aisha's drinks as an act of romantic interest, which was the kind of thing that happened to Aisha regularly, and that she narrated with a mixture of delight and performed exasperation. He listened to the whole thing. He was not thinking about the barista situation. He recorded his response. Okay, first of all, the extra espresso shot is definitely intentional, and you know it's intentional, and the fact that you're describing it as ambiguous is extremely Aisha of you. Second of all, he stopped. Start again. Second of all, I'm not romanticizing it. It's a preliminary interview. Most people don't get past preliminary interviews. The process has about 4 more stages before it becomes a job offer. And statistically, the odds are, you know what, the statistics aren't the point. The point is that I applied on a whim and the application somehow worked, which is gratifying, but it doesn't mean anything is actually going to change. I'm going to do the interview. I'm going to be professional, and I'm going to not be weird about the fact that I've been writing about Nova for 6 years. And then I'm going to go home, and if they don't advance me, I'll feel fine about it, because I always felt fine about it. And if they do advance me, I'll evaluate at that stage. A beat. I'm calm. I'm being very calm about this. He sent it and immediately recorded a second one. The safe distance thing was a bit much, by the way. Very dramatic. I'm going to think about it all day and pretend I'm not. He paused. Tell Theo his espresso shots are appreciated. Don't tell him I told you to tell him that. He put his phone down and opened his laptop and finished the ergonomic desk accessory caption, which was not his best work but was perfectly competent. He sent it. The offer was real. He was going to be Nova's temporary social media manager for an 8-month world tour. He was going to be in the same rooms as 5 people he had been writing about from a safe, managed distance for 6 years. He was going to have access to the backstage content he had spent a considerable portion of his adult life analyzing from the outside. He was going to do, professionally and for a very good salary, the thing he had been doing for love and habit in the dark of his own apartment at midnight. He was going to meet C and Juno. He was going to die. The thought arrived with the specific quality of the thoughts he'd been having since 21 when he'd first found Nova on a recommendation algorithm and watched their debut showcase 3 times in a row. It was not a serious thought. It was the brain's way of processing the proximity of something it had always treated as categorically unreachable. He was going to meet C and Juno, and he was going to be fine because he was a professional adult who had spent 6 years developing a sophisticated understanding of the difference between public persona and private person, who had written extensively about the ethics of parasocial relationships, who understood at a deep structural level that the sea and Juno on his wall and the sea and Juno in actual physical space were not and had never been the same entity. He knew all of that. He had written several thousand words about exactly that. He was still going to die, probably. He opened his phone and went to the at Nova Archive Accounts drafts folder. There were 11 posts in there, scheduled and ready to go. The next 3 weeks of content, the anniversary follow-up, the thread he'd been building about Nova's visual evolution across eras. He looked at them. He looked at the accounts analytics, which were good, consistently good, the kind of engagement metrics that had made 2 separate brand managers ask if he'd be interested in consulting on their artist accounts, which was how the contract work had started. He thought, briefly, about whether he should delete it. He listened to them all. He responded to most of them. He did not tell her that he had not deleted the fan account. He did not examine why. On the night before his first day, he sat at his desk in the dark, monitor on, noodles cold, the habit of it, and he looked at the SIM poster and he thought about what Aisha had said in that very first voice note. The safe distance thing. He thought about the word distance and what it meant when it stopped being protective and started being just another word for afraid. His phone lit up with one last Aisha voice note. It was 7 seconds long. You were allowed to want this, it said. Just remember that. You were always allowed. He went to bed without recording a response. He lay in the dark for a long time with the specific alertness of a person who is about to enter a story they've been reading from the outside for 6 years, and who is only now, in the quiet before it begins, allowing themselves to feel the size of it. He touched the back of his neck. He was fine. Chapter 4, The Green Room. Ms. Huang Suri was exactly as described in the official company materials, which Dominic had read twice on the train that morning. Head of Content and Talent Relations. 15 years with the label. Credited on 7 of Nova's 9 comeback strategies. What the official company materials had not prepared him for was the quality of her attention, which was the kind that made you feel that every interaction she'd ever had been filed and indexed and could be retrieved with minimal effort. She was in her mid to late 30s, Korean, impeccably assembled in the specific way of people who had decided that professional appearance was a form of communication and communicated accordingly. She shook Dominic's hand with exactly the right amount of pressure and showed him to the content office with the economy of someone whose time was always accounted for, down to the minute. You'll have full access to all 6 official channels, she said, walking at a pace Dominic matched easily. Content calendar, tour schedule, and crisis protocol are in the shared drive. I've included the brand Bible and a reference document for platform-specific formatting. Your predecessor left notes which you may find useful or may find dated. I'll leave that to your judgment. She said this without looking at him, which somehow made it feel more like a compliment than if she had. The group has final approval on all posted content. In practice, this means seeing Juno. He is exacting. I've heard, Dominic said, which was technically true and also a significant understatement. Suri looked at him briefly. Something that might have been the very early architecture of a smile crossed her expression and was gone. I imagine you have, she said, and continued walking. The label building was large and modern and possessed of the particular energy of a place where very expensive decisions were made at all hours. They passed 3 separate glass-walled conference rooms, all occupied, and a corridor lined with framed promotional photographs of their artists, Nova among them. A full-panel display from the Gravity era that Dominic kept his eyes forward for with the specific effort of a person who has trained themselves not to visibly react. He'd seen the photographs. He owned 2 of them, professionally printed. He did not need to react to them in a hallway on his first day. Suri led him through a second set of doors, down a shorter corridor, and stopped outside a room where the sound of music was just audible through the wall. Not a recording, something live, the particular acoustic quality of a large space with people in it. They're on a rehearsal break, she said. I'll introduce you now, briefly. There'll be a proper team, meeting tomorrow with a full tour staff. She pressed the door handle. They may not be at their most composed. Adjust accordingly. She opened the door. The green room was large and slightly chaotic in the way of spaces that held 5 people who had very different methods of recovery between choreography runs. There was equipment in one corner, a food table against the wall, and the distinct atmosphere of a group who had been in close proximity for long enough that they'd stopped performing for each other entirely. Dominic had a half-second of seeing them all at once and registered the following. In order, Park Ewan was on the couch with his shoes off, scrolling his phone, and looked up the moment the door opened with the attentiveness of someone who noticed everything. Kong Min Jae was standing at the food table eating something with complete commitment, and turned around chewing, unbothered by the interruption. Oh Taekwon was near the equipment corner, reviewing something on a tablet, and acknowledged the door opening with a nod that was professional and entirely sufficient. And then, one of them was sitting on the floor. Not dramatically on the floor, just sitting on the floor next to the couch, back against it, one knee up, the other leg extended. He was in rehearsal clothes, gray, functional, and he had a water bottle balanced on his knee, and his eyes were closed. Not asleep, resting in the specific way of someone whose body knew exactly where it was in space and didn't need to check. There was something about the quality of stillness he had that was different from simple relaxation, more like a carefully managed thing, internal and deliberate, the way a particular precision could look artless if you carried it long enough. He had lighter coloring than Dominic had expected from the photographs. Platinum hair, short and slightly pushed back, with one piece that had escaped the rest and landed on his forehead in a way that looked accidental and probably wasn't. He was lean in a way dancers were lean, built for movement in a manner that was visible even in stillness, something in the articulation of his wrists, the considered weight of how he held himself. He had softer features than the usual Nova Press photography conveyed. Rounded jaw, eyes that tilted slightly at the corners, currently closed. A mouth that, at rest, wore an expression that would get misread as serious by anyone who didn't know him well enough to understand it was just present. He opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked directly at Dominic with an expression of mild attention. Then he reached for his water bottle without looking at it, which was the kind of thing you could only do without looking if you'd put it there yourself and knew exactly where it was. And he drank some water and looked away. So did Baek, Nova's main dancer, 26, 3 years as a professional, debut at 20, described consistently in fan spaces as quiet and hard to read, and in one particularly uncharitable forum thread Dominic had once spent 45 minutes composing a response to, and then deleted, the background member. Dominic was going to think about that forum thread later and feel bad about the 45 minutes he hadn't spent defending Soul Better. Right now, Suri was speaking. "This is Dominic Reyes," she said. "He'll be managing your social channels for the duration of the tour. I expect him treated as a professional member of your support team." The last sentence was said to no one in particular and everyone in the room simultaneously, which was a skill Dominic respected. Ewan said, warmly and immediately, "Welcome. Did you eat? There's a lot of food." He gestured at the table with genuine hospitality. Min Jae said, "Good timing. The last content manager uploaded a reel that was like 6 pixels wide. It was a whole thing." Taekwon looked up from his tablet and gave Dominic a nod that was brief and clean and communicating. "I see you. You seem competent. Welcome." Dominic nodded back, and then there was a pause of approximately 3 seconds. He knew the pause was coming. He had known there would be a pause. He had rehearsed for the pause. The pause was seeing Juno existing in a room and existing in a specific way that rooms arrange themselves around, and Dominic had spent 6 years watching it happen in video and photography, and none of that had fully prepared him for the version of it that occurred in person. Cian was at the far end of the room, standing near the window with his phone in hand, and he looked up from his phone the way he did everything, with the quality of someone who had decided to redirect their full attention and was now doing so completely. He was tall, taller than the group photographs conveyed, nearly half a foot over Dominic, and he was built with the deliberate precision of someone whose physical presentation was a professional instrument. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, the kind of symmetrical face that photographed like a conspiracy. His hair was black, longer than in recent press materials, pulled back and up in a loose knot that was effortlessly perfect in the way that only came from considerable effort. He looked at Dominic for 3 seconds. Not an evaluating look, or not only that. The kind of look that processed incoming information and sorted it into relevant categories quickly and efficiently. Dominic had prepared for something overwhelming. He got something assessing. The content team sent someone new, Cian said. His voice was lower than it read in interviews, measured in a way that suggested every word had been weighed before deployment. Good. The last one kept using the wrong filters. He went back to his phone. The room resumed. Min-jae offered Dominic something from the food table. Ewan started asking about the tour schedule and whether Dominic had been to Tokyo, because they were opening the Asia leg in Tokyo. Taekwon, on his way out of the room, paused beside Dominic and said, without preamble, "The camera you have, that's a good choice for low light. The venue in Tokyo has terrible light in the wings." Dominic thanked him. Taekwon nodded and left, already looking at his tablet. It was fine. It was fine. It was more than fine. It had been professional, appropriate, exactly what it should have been. Cian had said 7 words to him and looked at his phone, which was a perfectly reasonable thing to do in a room full of people you were meeting for the first time, and the particular quality of those 7 words, mild approval, utility-based, the way you might compliment a piece of equipment, was also a perfectly reasonable thing. And Dominic was a professional who understood the difference between a pop idol with a constructed persona and an actual human person who was just on a rehearsal break. He was fine. He was in the specific register that Aisha would have identified immediately if she'd been watching, extremely not fine. He moved through the rest of the introduction. He answered Ewan's questions about Tokyo. He had not been to Tokyo. He made a mental note about the wing lighting. He did not look at Cian again. He was gathering his bag from the floor. Suri was going to show him the content suite next, when he saw his bag begin to tip sideways toward a camera rig propped against the wall beside it. His bag was not particularly heavy, but the rig looked expensive, and his first day was already happening. A hand appeared from somewhere to the left of him and steadied the rig before it moved more than an inch. Just that, a hand, and then the rig was stable. Dominic straightened up and turned, and Baek was already turning back toward the couch, water bottle in hand, the whole intervention taking up approximately 3 seconds of his attention. He did not appear to find it noteworthy. He sat back down on the floor, resumed his previous position, and looked at nothing in particular. He did not look at Dominic. Dominic looked at him for a moment, which he would not have been able to explain if asked. "Ready?" Sori said from the doorway. "Yes," Dominic said, and followed her, and spent the next 4 hours learning the content suite and the tour logistics and the 12-page brand Bible, and was entirely professional about all of it. He sent Aisha a voice note at 9:30 that night. It was 11 minutes long. It was nominally about first days and first impressions and the quality of the rehearsal space and the content suite setup. "Okay," Aisha said in the 4-second response that arrived 20 minutes later. But who steadied the camera rig? Chapter 5. The Framing Problem. By the end of the first week, Dominic had written 31 captions. 14 of them had been sent back. He had, in 6 years of running at Nova Archive, received exactly 2 pieces of negative feedback on his writing, both from commenters who were wrong. He had, in 2 years of brand contract work, received a total of 1 revision request, which had been about a color choice in the graphic and not the copy. He was aware, in the abstract and theoretical sense, that rejection was part of professional creative work. He was now becoming aware of it in the specific, practical, repeated 14 times in a week sense. The notes came through a shared document. They were brief. They were precise. They did not explain themselves. Caption 3, too conversational. Revise. Caption 7, the line break is wrong. Restructure. Caption 11, this reads like a fan wrote it. That last one had sat in the document for 40 minutes before Dominic had been able to write a response, which was understood. Revising. The response he had drafted first and deleted was 11 sentences long and used the phrase "with respect" twice, which was how he knew it was bad. He revised. The revisions came back. Still too much. He revised again. Better. Use this one. He had not felt the thing he was supposed to feel when Cian finally approved a caption. Not triumph, not relief. He had felt, vaguely, like something had been noted and filed, which was a sentence he wrote in the Nova copy: "Drafts do not post. document, and then stared at for a while, because he was a person who processed in writing and because the document was private and therefore not a problem. He was not having a crisis about seeing Juno. He was having a calibration period, which was normal and expected and which any reasonable professional would go through when entering a new role with a new client. The calibration period would end and the content approval process would normalize and he would stop writing things in private documents. He was very professional about all of this. On Thursday of the first week, 5 days in, 9 captions rejected at this point, the first of which had been a caption Dominic had privately thought was quite good and which had been returned with the note tone as off. What are you actually saying here? He was in a label's main workspace rewriting caption number 14. He had written it 4 times. He was rewriting it for the 5th time. It was 3:12 in the afternoon and the workspace was half empty, most of the tour staff in meetings or rehearsal, and he had a coffee that was acceptable and a Word document open and the specific particular frustration of someone who knew the right answer was in the vicinity but hadn't landed on it yet. His work is fine. Dominic's hand stopped on the keyboard. You're just in a bad mood. The voice was unhurried, not loud, the opposite of loud. Actually, the kind of delivery that carried not because it was projected but because the room was quiet enough to let it. Dominic turned. Baek was sitting at the work table across the room, a laptop open in front of him, a cup of something hot beside it. He was looking at the laptop. He appeared to have said the 2 sentences to his laptop screen, or to the middle distance, or to no one in particular, except that there was only one person who had work in front of him and one person who'd been watching that work get returned for 5 days. Cian, who had been leaning against the far wall scrolling his phone since 3 o'clock, said nothing. Dominic looked at Cian. Cian's expression was unreadable in the particular way of someone who had chosen unreadable as a permanent condition. He looked at his phone. Then, without any acknowledgement that Sol had spoken, he pushed off the wall and left the room. The door closed behind him. Dominic sat very still for a moment. Then he looked at caption number 14, which suddenly seemed substantially less important than it had 3 minutes ago. He looked at Sol. Sol was still looking at his laptop. He turned a page in the document he had open. He picked up his cup and drank from it. He had the quality, Dominic was realizing, of a person who took up exactly the amount of space they needed and not a centimeter more, which was a kind of physical intelligence that was different from Cian's, less about deliberate construction, more about genuine comfort in his own proportions. There was no performance in how he sat. The one piece of hair that had escaped onto his forehead was still there, exactly as it had been this morning, which meant it wasn't a styling choice, it just fell there, and he'd let it. Dominic realized he had been looking at Sol for 4 seconds, which was 1 second past professional. He looked back at his screen. He finished the caption, the right version of it, finally the one that had been hiding in the vicinity, and saved it and submitted it. He closed the document. He opened the private drafts folder and wrote, Baek told Cian his work was fine today. Cian walked away. I have been thinking about this for 4 minutes, and I am not sure what I'm thinking about. He closed that too. The caption was approved at 4:15. No note, just approved. Dominic sent Aisha a voice note at 7 minutes and 40 seconds, which was the longest one he'd sent since the first day. It was nominally about the content approval process and the specific professional difficulty of Cian's editorial standards, which were exacting in a way that was technically coherent even when it felt personal. He talked about the brand Bible. He talked about the platform strategy. He talked about the shared document system. Aisha's response came at 11 p.m. and was exactly 4 seconds long. Whose Sol? She said. Chapter 6, Conditions of Employment. He did not answer Aisha's question that night. He recorded 3 voice notes about it, each of which began with some version of Sol is just, he's one of the members, he's the main dancer. You know who Sol is? Aisha. You've watched their videos, and each of which he deleted before sending because they all sounded, even to him, like the voice note equivalent of a person talking too fast about someone they had just decided not to think about. He sent her a text instead. Sol is the main dancer. He told Cian off today about the caption rejections. Going to sleep. She sent back a single thumbs up emoji, which was how he knew she was storing the information and planned to do something with it later. The second week was better than the first. Not because Cian's editorial standards had shifted, they hadn't, and Dominic had a developing suspicion they never would, but because Dominic had begun to understand the grammar of them. Cian did not reject captions arbitrarily. He rejected them when they were performing, which was a specific critique that had taken Dominic until day 8 to decode. Cian had no interest in captions that announced their own cleverness, no patience for copy that was good in a way that was visible from the outside. He wanted the thing itself, the caption that didn't know it was a caption. Dominic understood this, finally, at 9:40 on Tuesday morning, and the understanding reorganized the whole first week into something that made sense. He wrote a caption that afternoon that came back with, "Use this." Just that. No revision note. Not better or this works or any of the small qualifications Cian deployed when he was tolerating something rather than accepting it. Just use this. Dominic stared at it for 30 seconds. Then he wrote "thank you" in the shared document, which was probably too many words, and closed it, and went to get a coffee, and did not examine why his chest felt strange. He was still examining the grammar of Cian on the Thursday of the second week, at 10 p.m., when the venue's Wi-Fi died. It died in the specific way of Wi-Fi that had been poorly maintained for too long and finally ran out of patience. Sudden, complete, and clearly not planning to come back quickly. The pre-show content package Dominic had been uploading sat at 63% on his screen and stayed there. He called the venue's IT contact. The IT contact said someone would be there within the hour. He looked at his phone. No connection there either. The media room was in a section of the venue that was emptying out as the rehearsal day wound down, most of the tour staff heading back to the hotel or to dinner. And the combination of the quiet and the stalled upload and the cold air coming through the poorly insulated window was producing in Dominic a specific kind of fatigue that was less about tired and more about the cumulative weight of 11 days of performing competence in close proximity to people he'd previously known only at a very safe remove. He was doing fine. He was doing well, objectively. He was not finding it easy. He was sitting with this thought, eating a granola bar he'd found in his bag from 2 days ago, when the media room door opened and Sol came in. He was carrying a container. The container had a lid and smelled immediately and powerfully of something that involved garlic and probably ginger, which in the context of a cold media room at 10 p.m. was approximately the most compelling smell Dominic had encountered in the last 2 weeks. Sol looked at the upload screen, then at Dominic. "Wi-Fi," Dominic said. "Sol no dead." He set the container on the end of the table, pulled out the chair 2 seats down from Dominic, and sat in it. He opened the container, which turned out to contain rice and something that smelled like doenjang jjigae, and began to eat with the focused attention of someone who was going to finish what he'd started and was not currently interested in rushing. After a moment, he put a portion of the container closer to Dominic. Not so close it was in front of him, just within reach if Dominic chose to reach. Dominic reached. They ate in silence, not an uncomfortable silence, more the specific quality of a silence between two people who both happened to be doing the same thing in the same space and had no particular argument with each other. Dominic ate the rice. It was good, better than the granola bar by a significant margin. "You don't have to stay," Dominic said eventually when the upload was still at 63% and showed no signs of aspiring to 64. "IT said an hour." "I know," Sol said. He did not leave. Dominic looked at him sideways. Sol was eating with one hand and had his phone on the table in front of him, not checking it, just having it present the way people who liked knowing where things were kept small things close. He was still in his rehearsal clothes. He hadn't changed, which meant he'd come directly here from rehearsal, or near enough. He looked, for the first time in Dominic's observation of him, slightly tired. Not dramatically tired, just the honest physical tiredness of someone who had been moving for 8 hours straight and was now sitting down. "Long rehearsal?" Dominic said. "Normal length. Is normal long?" Sol considered this. "Yes," he said. He ate another bite. "The Tokyo venue has a different stage configuration than we're used to. It changes some of the blocking in the third act." "Ah," Dominic said. He meant, "I know about the Tokyo venue from the tour documents, but tell me more." What he said was, "That's the first leg, right?" After Sol. Sol set his chopsticks down and looked at the upload screen, which had moved to 64% and was apparently making a go of it. You've been through the tour document about 11 times. Soul's mouth made a small movement that might have been amusement. He didn't elaborate. He picked up his chopsticks again. They talked, after that, with the particular ease of two people who had slid into conversation sideways and found it comfortable enough not to examine. Soul asked about the pre-show content package, specifically about the platform sequencing, which was the kind of precise structural question that Dominic found himself explaining with actual enthusiasm, because it was the part of his job that was genuinely interesting and that he rarely got to talk through with anyone who wasn't going to skim the answer. Soul listened without performing listening. He asked a follow-up that indicated he'd understood the first answer. He disagreed about the timing on the story versus the feed post in a way that was flat and certain, and Dominic conceded after thinking about it for 30 seconds. Correct. You're right, Dominic said. I'll move it. Sol nodded. He didn't say thank you, or I thought so, or elaborate on being right in any way. He simply received the concession and moved on, which was the most natural thing Dominic had encountered since starting this job. They talked about small things. The hotel in Tokyo. Whether Dominic had brought enough for cold venues, because the Tokyo venue was cold regardless of the season. He had not. Soul told him the specific floor number of the 24-hour convenience store nearest the venue. The specific hierarchy of bad airport food, which was a topic Soul had opinions about that he delivered with the same flat, unhurried certainty he applied to everything else, and which made Dominic laugh at one point. Actually laugh. Not the parasocial laugh he'd been deploying for 11 days, but the short, involuntary one. Soul looked at him when he laughed. Briefly. The way he looked at things when they surprised him, with a slight tilt of his head, barely a degree. Then he looked back at his phone. At 11:15, IT arrived and fixed the connection. The upload moved to 65/70 completed. Dominic sent the confirmation to the content calendar and closed his laptop. He looked up. Soul was already putting the container away, phone in his back pocket, moving to leave with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been somewhere for a while and had decided the somewhere was done now. Soul, Dominic said. Soul looked back. Thanks. He gestured at the empty container. You didn't have to. Soul was quiet for a moment. You look like you've been here a while, he said. He said it factually, without inflection, and then he left. Dominic sat in the empty media room with the upload confirmation on his screen and the granola bar wrapper still on the table beside him, and he thought about that for a moment. Then he opened his voice note app and recorded a note to Aisha. It was 9 minutes and 40 seconds long. He talked about the Wi-Fi situation. He talked about the Tokyo staging change. He talked about the content calendar timing and the disagreement about story sequencing, which he had lost correctly. He talked about the food, briefly, in a way that was factual and unremarkable. When he listened to it back, he noticed that he'd spent 7 of the 9 minutes and 40 seconds talking about the conversation, which was, he told himself, because it had been his only real conversation of the day, and people needed to talk to someone, and it hadn't been a significant conversation, just a practical one, just two professionals eating food in a media room and discussing the content calendar. He sent the voice note. He sent a second, shorter one. Also, I should have said, you've met Soul, in the sense that you know what he looks like from the videos. He's the main dancer. He's fine. Everything is fine. He deleted the second one before sending. He sent it anyway. Aisha's response arrived at midnight. It was still 4 seconds long. This time it said, that was 4 minutes about Soul. Chapter 7, Soul, then Tokyo, then it gets complicated. The first show was in Seoul. Dominic had been to concerts before. He had been to 3 Nova concerts, specifically, each of which he had documented extensively on at Nova Archive with the dedication of someone who understood that the distance between experiencing a thing and capturing it correctly was the whole of the job. He knew what a Nova show looked like from the audience. He had written about it in enough detail that he could probably reconstruct the blocking from memory, the light cues, the point in the second act where Cian slowed the tempo down for 30 seconds before the third song hit, and the crowd figured out what was happening, and the sound from 70,000 people arriving all at once was the closest thing to tectonic. He thought he was prepared. He was not prepared. The difference was the wings. Being in the wings for a concert was a fundamentally different experience from being in the audience, and the difference was not about proximity, although proximity was part of it. It was about the angle. From the audience you saw the show. From the wings, you saw the show happening, which was a different thing entirely. You saw the mechanics of it, the cue lights, the quick changes, the stage crew moving in practice silence. And underneath the mechanics, you saw the thing the mechanics were built to support, which was 5 people performing at the edge of what was physically possible for the duration of 2 hours and 20 minutes. Even knowing the machinery, even having spent 3 weeks watching rehearsals, it was extraordinary. Dominic was running the live coverage from the wings, which meant phone in one hand, camera in the other, moving along the wing line as the show progressed, and catching the shots that the front-of-house cameras wouldn't get. The angle from stage left on the opening formation, the brief shot of Minji's face right before the light hit his section of the stage. The quality of the group's breathing between songs when they were close to the wing, and the exhaustion was visible and real, and immediately went away when the next cue hit. He got the shots. He got captions in his head as he worked, which was how he knew he was doing the job correctly. When the words arrived alongside the images without effort, the way they'd always arrived at Nova Archive, in the voice that was just his. He posted 3 things during the show, and they were good, immediately and visibly good, the engagement climbing in real time on his phone screen. He was doing his job. Then, in the second act, between the 7th and 8th songs, Cian walked to the edge of the stage. It was a planned moment. Dominic knew it was planned. He'd seen it in rehearsal twice. Cian walked to the edge of the stage and looked out at the crowd for 10 seconds while the music held, and the crowd held with it, 70,000 people waiting, and it was a good piece of staging, a practice thing. Except that Cian's face was not practiced. Whatever Cian was looking at in those 10 seconds, whatever 70,000 points of light and sound added up to when you stood at the edge of a stage you'd been building toward for 11 years, his face was doing something Dominic had never seen it do. Not the performing sincerity he was so good at, not the magnetism, the calculated warmth. Something underneath all of that, something that looked like a person. Dominic had his camera up because that was his job, and because he was standing in the correct position, and because some part of him had known the moment was coming even if he hadn't known what would be in it. He got the shot, and then Sin's eyes tracked toward the wings, not finding Dominic specifically, just moving along the line of the stage. And for 1 second they landed approximately where Dominic was standing, and Dominic had the camera up, and he got that too. The show continued. The crowd sound came back. Sin turned and walked back into the formation like nothing had happened, because professionally nothing had, and the third act hit, and the audience sound was the thing it always was, physical and enormous. Dominic stood in the wings with the camera and felt, in the specific place where professional satisfaction usually lived, something he was not going to examine right now. He uploaded the full batch at midnight. He flagged 3 shots for the content calendar. He did not flag the wing shot, the unguarded one, because it hadn't been cleared, and because he wasn't sure what to do with it, and because there was a version of that photograph that was too private to post, and he needed to think about where the line was. The next morning, Cian was in the content suite when Dominic arrived at 8:30. Dominic set down his coffee. He opened his laptop. He was going to be completely normal about this. The photo from last night, Cian said, without looking up from the monitor he was standing in front of. He was looking at Dominic's upload batch, which Dominic had not anticipated. Use it. Dominic's coffee was warm in his hand. Which one? Cian turned the monitor slightly. The wing shot. The unguarded one. Dominic looked at it on the monitor and felt the same thing he'd felt taking it, which was the feeling of having seen something that wasn't supposed to be seen, and which also happened to be the best photograph he'd taken in several years. Okay, he said. The framing in the other 3 is good. Cian turned the monitor back. The light on the left in the Min-jae shot is wrong. Fix the balance before you post it. He left the room. Dominic looked at the monitor for a moment. He looked at the wing shot, at the particular expression on Cian's face that he'd managed to catch, at the way the stage light from below had done something with the angle that made the photograph look almost candid in a way that concert photography usually fought against and couldn't achieve. He should feel triumphant. He'd been working towards Cian's approval for 2 weeks. This was the clearest approval he'd received. He felt again that thing, the vague sensation of something noted and filed, except that this time the thing being filed was not a caption, but a photograph, and the photograph was of a face he'd been trying to understand from a safe distance for 6 years. And looking at it on the monitor, now it occurred to him that the distance between the face in the photograph and the face he'd put on his wall was smaller than he'd expected. And also that this should feel like a good thing and did not feel entirely like a good thing. He fixed the light balance on the Min-jae shot. He posted both. The wing photograph got more engagement in 4 hours than anything he'd posted that month. He opened the Nova copy, drafts, do not post, document, and wrote, "I keep waiting to feel what I expected to feel here, and something keeps getting in the way of it. Not sure what to call the thing that's in the way." He closed it without finishing the sentence. That evening, the tour staff had the first group dinner. All 5 members, the core road crew, Dominic, the sound engineer, the tour's head of security. A long table in a restaurant that someone had clearly chosen with logistics in mind rather than atmosphere, good food, reasonable noise level, enough room that people naturally spread into configurations that made sense. Dominic was at one end of the table doing something with his phone when a plate appeared in front of him. He looked up. Sol was sitting down 2 seats to his left, already turning back to the conversation he'd been having with Taekwon, and the plate in front of Dominic had rice and 2 side dishes on it. And Dominic had, in the management of his own professional presentation for the evening, not ordered for himself. He looked at the plate. He looked at Sol, who was talking to Taekwon in Korean at a volume that wasn't meant to carry, apparently unconcerned with having just done the thing. He had his water glass in one hand and was gesturing slightly with it, the way he gestured when he was making a point he was certain about. Dominic ate the rice. It was good. He sent Aisha a voice note at 11:15 that night, lying on the hotel bed with his shoes still on and the tour schedule open on his laptop. The voice note was 6 minutes and 10 seconds long. He described the show. The show took up about 40 seconds. The wing shot, Cian's approval. That took about a minute. It happened on a Tuesday night between Tokyo and Osaka. They were in Tokyo for 3 more days after the first show. Promotional content, a press day, a fan event that generated its own full content package. And Dominic had been in the media room until 11, had gone back to the hotel, had showered, had opened his laptop to review tomorrow's schedule, and had gone to bed at 12:15 with the particular targeted exhaustion of someone whose job involved being professionally switched on for extended periods. He was asleep. Then his phone lit up. He checked it out of habit, the half-awake reflex of someone who had been on call for a live account for 6 years. The screen showed a message from a contact saved as Kong Min-jae, Nova, which he'd added to his phone in the first week's contact exchange. This was the first time Min-jae had used it for anything other than work-adjacent communication, which had previously consisted of one message asking Dominic to send him the high-resolution version of a specific press photo and one message containing only a video of a dog failing to catch a frisbee with no context provided. This message was a screenshot. He woke up faster. The screenshot was from at Nova Archive. Specifically, it was a post from 2 years ago, a thread he'd written about Nova's Gravity Era promotional tour, which he remembered because he'd been extremely pleased with it at the time, and it had gotten more engagement than anything he'd posted that month. Dominic, thank you. For the definitely. Min-jae, obviously. Now sleep. He had not slept for some time. He lay in the dark and thought about 26 screenshots and 6 years of archive and the specific feeling of being known sideways from the outside by someone who had looked at the evidence and decided to treat it kindly. It was not comfortable, exactly. The mortification was real. The jawline post was an actual thing that existed on the internet. But underneath the mortification was something else, something small and warmth adjacent that he didn't have a clean word for. The relief of someone seeing the worst of the evidence and not running. He got up because lying in the dark was not helping and because he was going to be useless tomorrow if he didn't do something with his nervous system other than let run. He went to the stairwell, which was quiet and fluorescent lit, and which had the specific empty quality of a space that existed only to get from one place to another. He sat on a step. He put his back against the wall. He did the breathing thing that Aisha had once sent him a voice note about during a different crisis in a different city, the one where you counted. He was on the 4th count when he heard the stairwell door open. He looked up. Baek looked down at him. He was in a plain gray t-shirt and track pants, holding his phone loosely in one hand, and he looked at Dominic with the mild attention of someone who had come into the stairwell for their own reasons and found it occupied. Then he came the rest of the way through the door and sat down on the step above Dominic's, his back against the opposite wall, his legs stretched out. He did not ask what happened. He had his phone in his hand, and he turned it over once, twice, the absent motion of someone who kept small things close when they needed grounding, and then he sat on the step beside him. They sat in the stairwell. The fluorescent light above them buzzed very faintly. Somewhere several floors up a door opened and closed, and the sound traveled down the shaft and disappeared. Dominic was aware that he should probably say something. He was also aware that Soul didn't appear to require him to say something, which was itself its own specific kind of attention, the kind that didn't demand anything back. He said, "It's fine. I'm fine. It's someone found something. On my phone. Something I wasn't ready for. It's sorted now, it's just." He stopped. A lot. Sol no did. He didn't ask what's something. He stayed. 20 minutes by the clock on Dominic's phone. Maybe 22. He stayed and didn't ask and didn't fill the silence. And Dominic's nervous system eventually did the thing it needed to do, wound down to something manageable, and the count he'd been doing stopped being necessary. When Sol stood up, he picked up his phone and turned toward the door, and then he stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back. "Whatever it is," he said, "it's probably not as visible as you think." He meant it in the general sense. Dominic understood he meant it in the general sense. The specific reassurance that most of what we are certain other people can see about us is in fact interior and invisible. He understood that, intellectually, what his nervous system did with it was something else. There was a lurch, low in his chest, brief and specific, the kind of thing that happened when two things touched that you hadn't realized were adjacent. He suppressed it with the competent efficiency of 6 years of practice. He looked at the closed stairwell door for a while after Sol left. Then he went back to his room and opened his laptop and opened the Nova copy, drafts do not post, document, and sat for a moment. He wrote, "The stairwell, 11:58 p.m. He didn't ask. He read it back. He closed the laptop. He went to sleep, eventually, and in the morning the mortification had settled into something livable, and the evidence folder in Minji's phone was presumably still there, carefully labeled, which was the most Min-Jae form of loyalty he could imagine, and he thought about that and found it helped. Chapter 9, 14 captions. Tokyo's second show was at a venue called the Dome, which was large in the way that required a specific recalibration of what you thought large meant. 72,000 seats. A stage configuration that extended further into the audience than the Seoul venue, which changed the camera angles and the wing sight lines, and the pre-show content strategy that Dominic had already revised twice, and which he was now, at 10:40 p.m. the night before the show, being asked to revise again. The message came through the shared document at 10:37. The pre-show package is wrong. The tone isn't right for this venue. Revise the full set. That was all. No specification of what wrong meant or what right would look like or which of the 12 pieces in the pre-show package was the particular locus of the wrongness. Just revise the full set. By morning, Dominic looked at the message for a long moment. He looked at the pre-show package, which he had built over 3 days with the particular care he gave to things he knew would be scrutinized. It was good. He was nearly certain it was good. He'd shown the draft to Suri's assistant, who had said it was strong. He'd cross-referenced it with the international content data and the platform timing he'd corrected after the first Tokyo show. He thought about pushing back. He thought about the message he'd drafted and deleted in the first week, the one that was 11 sentences long and used the phrase "with respect" twice. He opened the pre-show package. The workspace was empty at this hour except for 2 members of the lighting crew at the far end, who were doing something with cables and paid no attention to Dominic. He worked. He started with the framing. If the tone was wrong, the framing was where it lived, in the first and last lines of each piece, in the connective tissue between the event and the emotional register he was asking the audience to arrive in. He rebuilt it from there. He was on the 4th piece when he heard the door. He did not look up. He was in the part of the work where looking up would cost him the thread. He wrote 3 more pieces. He rebuilt the closing sequence. He left. Dominic sat in the empty room for a moment. He thought about the fact that Sol had read his pre-show package at some point in the last 2 hours, which meant he'd been paying attention to the screen across the room, which meant the absorption in his phone had not been as complete as it looked. He thought about what that meant, and then stopped thinking about it, because it was nearly 2:30 and he had a 7 a.m. call time. He saved the document. He shut the laptop. He went back to the hotel. The Dome show the next night was the largest audience Dominic had ever been in a room with. Standing in the wings, running the live coverage, the crowd sound was a physical thing, a pressure in the air, and when the show hit its peak in the third act, the energy of 72,000 people doing the same thing at the same time produced something that was less like sound and more like weather. The content was good, the best he'd produced for Nova. He knew this because Suri sent him a message afterward that said, "Strong work tonight. Keep this standard for Osaka." And he knew this because when he passed Cian in the corridor after the show, Cian looked at him, the quick, assessing look, and said the framing in the package was right. Then he walked on. Dominic stood in the corridor for a moment with his camera bag on his shoulder and thought about 3 a.m. in the media room and the 2 sentences Sol had said that had reordered everything and the new framing that had come out of 2 hours of rebuilding and the fact that Cian's approval was still, after everything, a thing that landed with weight. He thought about which landing felt different now. He didn't write it down. Not yet. Some things needed to sit before they were ready to be words. Chapter 10, Fan Service. The tour bus between Tokyo and Osaka was 4 hours, which was the kind of journey that fell into the gap between too short to sleep and too long to stay fully alert. The 5 members had their own seating configuration. This was not a negotiated thing, just the arrangement that had emerged from years of proximity and mutual knowledge of where each person needed to be to survive a bus trip. And the tour staff occupied the back section, which Dominic had learned to treat as a small mobile office when he needed it. He was reviewing the Osaka content schedule when Min Jae materialized at his row. This was a thing Min Jae did. He appeared without preamble, sat down in whatever space was adjacent, and began the conversation as if it had already been happening for several minutes, and he was simply resuming it. He was holding his phone, and he had the expression of someone who had been sitting on something for an indeterminate amount of time and had decided this was the moment. So, Min Jae said, "No," Dominic said, "I haven't said anything yet. I know the face. Whatever the face is for, no." Min Jae looked extremely entertained. He set his phone face down on the seat between them, which was, Dominic knew, the visual signal for, "I am about to say something without my phone nearby, because I want there to be no record of it." "Okay, so, I've been going back through the archive." He paused for effect. "The archive, Dom. You mentioned the archive. I found a jawline post. You mentioned that too. I found a thread about the Gravity Era tour." Min Jae pulled his phone back up and opened it. "I want to read you something." Min Jae. Seeing Juno has the specific quality of a person who knows exactly what he looks like from every angle in a room and has decided to make this everyone else's problem. "You wrote that. You wrote that, and 200,000 people liked it. 230,000. 230,000 people agreed with you that seeing makes his face everyone's problem." Min Jae was grinning now. "You have been absolutely unhinged about this man for 6 years. Do you understand that? 6 years of very articulate unhinged." Dominic looked at his Osaka schedule. "Thank you for this feedback. There's more. There's always more. I found a series about Sol's dance evolution." Min Jae said it easily, like an observation, like it was the same category as the scene content. He was watching Dominic's face when he said it. Dominic kept his eyes on the schedule. "That was a good series. It was a great series." Min Jae tilted his head. "You spent 2 weeks on it. It's very specific about the way he moves. Very, you know." He waved his hand in a gesture that encompassed approximately everything. "Specific. Good observation is specific. That's what makes it good." And Min Jae said, in the tone of someone who had filed something in the evidence folder of their mind. Then, louder. Loud enough to carry, which was the thing Dominic had not anticipated, the thing that separated what he'd expected from what was actually happening. Min Jae raised his voice and said, to the bus at large, to no one and therefore everyone, "Hey, I found something in the Internet Archive about our content manager." Dominic closed his laptop. The bus was not large. The 5 members of Nova were not far away. Ewan looked up immediately, already interested. Taekwon glanced up from his own screen with a brief look of mild professional assessment. Min Jae had his phone out again and was reading with the delivery of someone who had been waiting for this exact audience. The thing about seeing Juno's jawline he couldn't finish. He started laughing. He tried again. The thing about seeing Juno's jawline is that it appears to have been designed by someone who understood the assignment at a cellular level, and the rest of us simply have to live with the fact that this is the world we are in now. Ewan made a noise that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh and buried his face in his arm. Taekwon looked out the window with the expression of someone who had decided that what was happening in the rest of the bus was not his concern, and the expression was so serene it was clearly performed. Cian, who had been at the front of the bus with his headphones in and his phone in his hand, lowered the headphones. He had heard enough to understand what was being read. He looked at his phone. He looked at Min Jae. He looked at Dominic. His expression was unreadable, not in the deliberate way, in the actually processing something way which was different, which Dominic had learned to distinguish. Minji helpfully held the phone up to show Sin the source, which was at Nova Archive, which had 230,000 followers and 6 years of archive. Dominic was considering whether he could dissolve into the tour bus upholstery. He was conducting a serious inquiry into this possibility. "Oh my God," Ewan said, lifting his face from his arm. His eyes were bright. "How long have you?" 6 years, Min Jae said cheerfully. 6 years, Ewan repeated, with a reverence appropriate to the figure. Cian read something on the phone. He read it for a moment. His face did not change into anything Dominic could classify. He handed the phone back to Min Jae. He put his headphones back on. Sol, who was 2 rows behind Cian and who had been looking at something in his lap throughout this entire sequence, looked up once. He looked at Dominic's face. Then he looked at the window. The corner of his mouth moved very slightly. Not a smile, just the architecture of one, the structure that a smile would use before it went back. The bus moved. Min Jae, satisfied, returned to his seat. Ewan made approximately 6 more quiet sounds of delight in the next 5 minutes, and then went back to his book. Taekwon continued to observe the window with great serenity. Dominic opened his laptop. He opened the Osaka schedule. He stared at it. He was fine. He was mortified, but that was survivable, and Min Jae had promised the evidence folder was private, and this was separate from the evidence folder. This was public. This was just his writing being attributed to him in a room full of people, which was embarrassing but not catastrophic. He was categorically not fine. The next morning, Cian found him in the content suite. This had become a pattern. Cian arrived early, reviewed the overnight content performance, said something precise, and left. Dominic had learned to be there first and to have his laptop open and his coffee in hand, which was the preparation for normal Cian mornings. Cian stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he came in, sat down across from Dominic for the first time, rather than standing at the monitor, and looked at him. "Why are you still running the account?" he said. "You're here." It was a genuine question. Not rhetorical, not a critique. The specific flatness of a person who wants a real answer and is waiting for one. Dominic held his coffee. He thought about the question, which was a better question than it appeared. Why was he still running at Nova Archive? He had a job now. He was inside the thing he'd been writing about. The fan account was 6 years of safe distance, and the safe distance was gone. The account existed as a kind of residue of a life he was no longer living in the same way. He said, "I don't know." Cian looked at him for a moment. He had the quality, in this particular moment, of someone who was reading something behind what was being said. Dominic didn't know when he'd started being able to tell the difference between Cian's reading the room look and his real attention. But he could now. "The writing is good," Cian said. He said it the way he said true things, looking at the middle distance rather than at Dominic, and then standing up and then leaving. Dominic sat with that for a moment. "The writing is good." The most Cian possible compliment. Specific, clean, impossible to categorize as warm or cold, correct in its way. Not nothing. He opened the private document. He wrote, "I have 2 versions of this job now. The one Suri hired me for, and the one Min Jae knows about. I'm not sure those are supposed to be the same thing. I'm not sure they can be." He closed it. He wrote the first caption of the Osaka content set, and it was, he thought, quite good. Not fan account good. Professional good. The voice that had been calibrating for a month, finding its register in the gap between what he knew and what he was allowed to say. He posted it. Then, because he was Dominic Reyes, and because the account had 230,000 followers, and because the Jawline post was already out there, he opened it Nova Archive and posted something too. A brief, quiet thing about the experience of seeing a show from the wings that was entirely true and entirely imprecise, the kind of writing that said a real thing at an angle. 112,000 interactions in the first hour. He looked at the number and thought, He did not examine this too hard. Chapter 11. What Soul Does with His Hands. The Osaka venue had a good rehearsal space. Dominic knew this because he had been in it for 4 hours, which was not the longest he had spent in a rehearsal space. Tokyo held that record on account of the pre-show package rebuild, but which was long enough to know where the good light was, which corners had sound bleed from the adjacent corridor, and precisely at what point in the afternoon the temperature dropped enough to matter. He was photographing a run-through. This was part of the job, not the primary part. The primary part was the official content. The package posts, the live coverage, the platform-calibrated stories. But Sori had asked for a selection of rehearsal shots for the behind-the-scenes archive, which was a quarterly release and required a certain number of hours of footage and photography that were raw enough to read as candid without actually being unmanaged. Dominic had been doing this since Seoul. He was good at it. He understood the specific grammar of a candid photograph that had been composed. He moved along the side of the space, camera up, watching. The run-through was a section of the second act. Not the full act, a 2-song sequence they'd been working on since Tokyo, something with a new formation change that Taekwon had apparently flagged as slightly off in the blocking, which required the whole thing to be rebuilt from the center out. The choreographer was watching from the edge of the space. The members were working. Dominic had been photographing Cian. This was, on its surface, the correct decision. Cian was the face of Nova, the subject of most of the official content, and his physical presentation and rehearsal, precise, controlled even in motion, the kind of intentionality that looked natural because it had been practiced until it was made for reliable shots. The archive content worked best when it balanced the polished performance shots with something that felt grounded, and Cian grounded himself, even in rehearsal, in a way that the camera found easily. So, he was photographing Cian. Except, there was a moment in the formation change, a specific beat in the second song, near the end of the sequence, where the group spread out and then pulled back in, where the choreography had been adjusted for the new blocking, and the adjustment put Soul at the center of the formation for approximately 4 counts. Not the featured position, not a spotlight moment, just 4 counts where the math of the new blocking put him there, at the center, before the others came back in. Dominic got the shot. He looked at the shot on his camera screen. He put the camera back up and continued moving. He got the shot again. Slightly different angle, same 4 counts. He put the camera down and looked at the back of his own hand for a moment. He had 47 photographs from the 4 hours. He reviewed them at the end of the run-through, sitting in the corner of the space while the members broke for water, and the choreographer and Taekwon had an extended technical conversation about sight lines and spatial intervals. 17 of the 47 photographs were of Soul. Not of Soul prominently. Not of Soul in any way that would be legible as a choice. Many of them had other members in the frame, or were clearly ensemble shots that happened to have Soul well lit, or were technically excellent in ways that could be attributed to angles and timing rather than to any persistent, recurring direction of the camera. But 17 photographs. Out of 47. He looked at the shot from the 4-count center moment. Soul mid-transition, one arm extending into the space the formation was opening into, his weight shifted forward, his face. And this was the thing, this was what the camera had found. His face completely absorbed in the doing of the thing. No performance in it. No awareness of the camera, of the edge of the space, of any of the ambient professional watching that was always present in rehearsal. Just the specific quality of someone who was doing a thing they understood in their body, and the doing of it was the whole of their attention. Dominic looked at the photograph for a long time. It was technically better than the Cian shots. He knew this the way he knew good writing. not as a judgment, just as a fact, the same way you knew when a sentence landed and when it didn't. The composition was correct. The light from the overhead rig had caught something in Sol's extended arm that gave the photograph a depth that the scene shots, for all their reliability, didn't have. It was a better photograph. His camera had found it because it was the better photograph. That was all. He uploaded the batch. He looked at the numbers. He flagged 12 photographs for the archive selection. He flagged 7 scene shots, which was the appropriate balance for content purposes. He flagged 3 ensemble shots. He flagged 2 Sol shots. Then he unflagged one. Then he reflagged it because it was genuinely excellent, and then he moved on. He opened his private document and wrote, "I spent 4 hours photographing a rehearsal, and the camera kept going back to Sol. I don't know what to do with this information. I'm attributing it to compositional instinct. I'm not sure that's the right attribution." He looked at the sentence. He wrote another one below it. "The photograph from the center 4 count is the best thing I've taken this month. I used this in shots. This is the correct professional decision." He closed the document. He used the scene shots. He was very professional about it. That night, in the hotel, he lay on his bed with his laptop open to the private document and read the whole thing from the beginning, which was something he rarely did. He'd been adding to it for weeks. The stairwell sentence, the media room night, the observations about patterns, the things Sol had said, and the specific weight they had when Dominic replayed them, which he was aware was a thing he did and was choosing not to examine. He read it. The document was 9 pages now. He had not noticed it getting to 9 pages. He looked at the entries and noticed, with the particular quality of noticing that arrived when you had been not noticing something long enough for it to become obvious, that the document was structured. Not deliberately. He hadn't organized it, hadn't made a decision about what to include and what to leave out. But there was a shape to it. The early entries were mostly about seeing, the caption rejections, the approval patterns, the gap between the idol he'd built a model of and the person he was meeting. And then, starting around week 3, the document began to accumulate something else. Not replacing the scene entries, those were still there, but building alongside them. Parallel, like a second column that had been growing at a different rate. All of the second column was Sol. Dominic closed the laptop. He put on the nightstand. He looked at the ceiling. He thought, briefly, about the 19-year-old who had started at Nova Archive after watching Nova's debut showcase 3 times in a row and had known, even then, something about the difference between a thing you watched and a thing you felt. He thought about 17 photographs out of 47. He thought about the particular expression on Sol's face in the center 4 count, which was the most unguarded thing he had photographed since the wing shot in Sol, and which was nothing like the wing shot. The wing shot had been seen performing beneath his own performance, a brief glimpse of the human underneath the product, but which was its own kind of unguarded, and he was not sure he had a clean word for what kind. He opened the laptop. He opened the private document. He wrote, "The document has a shape I didn't put there. I'm going to go to sleep." He went to sleep. In the morning, he posted a Sol shot on at Nova Archive. Not the center 4 count photograph that hadn't been posted anywhere, wasn't on any official channel, was sitting in a folder on his laptop labeled Rehearsal Archive, uncleared. He posted something from the official batch, one of the ensemble shots, framed and cropped to bring Sol's extended arm into prominence in a way that could be read as compositional rather than intentional. It got 42,000 interactions in 6 hours. He stared at the number. He thought, "I've been watching this for 6 years from the outside, and I'm only now understanding what I was actually looking at." He did not write that down. Some things were too close to write down yet. Chapter 12, The Parking Lot. The Osaka press night ran 40 minutes over. This was not unusual. Press nights ran over the way flights ran late and rehearsals ran long. By nature, by design, by the specific accumulation of small delays that were each individually defensible and collectively inevitable. Dominic had learned to build the 40 minutes into his schedule. He had not learned to enjoy them. This particular 40-minute overrun happened because the venue's photography area was smaller than the advanced materials had indicated, which meant the press photographers had to rotate in shifts, which meant the group had to be available for longer than planned, which meant the formal part of the evening didn't end until well past 10. He'd been on his feet since 7 a.m. He had run the live coverage for the press event, managed 3 platform posts in real time, fielded 2 messages from Suri about a clearance issue with one of the photographs from the Tokyo leg, and eaten half a granola bar at approximately 4:15 because that was when there had been a spare moment. He was packing up the equipment when he said it. Not to anyone. He was alone in the press area, the crew having mostly dispersed, the equipment cases open in front of him, and he said it the way he said things sometimes when he was past the point of internal processing, out loud, to the room. I just need a minute. He meant it in the general sense. The body's request for a pause. He was not requesting a specific minute from a specific person because there was no one in the room. Then the door opened. Sol looked at him. He had his jacket on, which meant he had already been heading out, and he had clearly been several steps into leaving. He stopped in the doorway. I know, Dominic said. You were going. Sol came the rest of the way into the room. He looked at the open equipment cases, at the granola bar wrapper on the table, at the particular quality of Dominic's expression, which Dominic was aware was not his professional expression and was very much the expression of someone who had been going since 7 a.m. and had just asked a room for a minute. Where are we? Sol said. It was a good series. He said it before he could think about whether to say it. I was proud of it. I wrote it carefully. I don't want you to think it was the same kind of thing as the jawline post. Sol looked at him, sideways, in the particular way he had when he was bringing his full attention to something without making a production of it. I know it wasn't, he said. You read it. I found it. A long time before you started this job. Dominic was very still. Oh, the series was... Sol stopped. He looked at the city light for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was the same steady, unhurried thing it always was. But there was something different in it, a quality of choosing the words with more care than usual. It was the first time I'd read something that was actually looking at the work, not the performance, not the group, the specific things I was trying to do. Someone had noticed what I was doing with my hands. The sentence landed in the cold air between them. Dominic thought about the photograph from his center 4 count in rehearsal, the extended arm, the absorbed quality of Sol's face, what he had written in the private document. Someone had noticed what I was doing with my hands. He had not, to his knowledge, written that sentence anywhere, but it was the right sentence. It was the specific thing he had been trying to say in 2 weeks of archive posts and had been saying, apparently, in a way that had reached. He did not say any of this. He said, I'm glad it landed right. Sol no did. He had his phone in his hand, turning it over in the absent grounding way, and he set it on his knee. You're easier to talk to than you look, he said. Dominic laughed. Short, involuntary, the real one. What does that mean? You present very. Sol made a small movement with one hand, indicating something. Composed. Like you're running the conversation at a slight remove. Like you're writing it while it's happening. I'm not. I know. That's the point. He turned to look at Dominic directly, and the city light did something with his expression that made it completely readable for a moment. Open in a specific way, he was open when he wasn't choosing to be otherwise. You're not doing it right now. Dominic was quiet. The city went on being a city. The cold was settling in properly now, the kind that worked through fabric rather than against it. A truck at the far end of the loading bay started up and pulled out, and the sound of it moved through the space and then was gone. At some point, he didn't track when, exactly, the conversation moved. Not dramatically, not into territory that would have been legible as significant from the outside. Sol talked about the blocking adjustment for the second act and what Take One had seen in it that the rest of them hadn't. Dominic talked about the platform clearance issue from the Tokyo leg and the specific bureaucratic texture of label legal departments. Sol said something dry about label legal departments that made Dominic laugh again, the real laugh. They were not talking about anything important. They were, Dominic was aware, talking about everything important in the way of people who had decided not to be careful without deciding it. It was 2 hours. He knew this because he checked his phone when Sol stood up, and it was 12:40, and the press night had ended at 10:17. 2 hours and 23 minutes in folding chairs in a loading bay in Osaka. He had not noticed. Sol put his jacket on properly. He had his phone in his pocket and his hands loose at his sides, and he looked at Dominic with the mild, complete attention that Dominic had spent 2 months learning to not look at directly. The ramen place, Sol said. Tomorrow, if there's time. Before the second show. Yeah, Dominic said. Okay. Sun nodded. He walked back inside. Dominic sat in the folding chair for another 5 minutes. He was cold. He was also, underneath the cold, something else, a specific warmth that lived in the chest rather than on the skin, the warmth of having been in a room with someone and having it require nothing from him, not the professional surface, not the managed presentation, not the version of himself that knew how to hold a conversation at a slight remove. He had just spent 2 hours talking. He had not written a word of it. He went inside. He went to his room. He lay on the bed with his phone and opened Aisha's contact and recorded a voice note. He talked for 11 minutes. He talked about the press night overrun and the equipment and the folding chairs. He talked about the ramen place. He talked about the sentence about small things being specific. He talked about the dance series and what Sol had said about his hands and how Dominic had not known what to do with that in the moment and was not sure he knew now. He talked about 2 hours in a parking lot. He called a parking lot, though technically it was a loading bay, but parking lot was the word that felt right, the word that captured the quality of the space, temporary and unremarkable, and somehow its own contained world. He stopped recording. He listened to the voice note back, all 11 minutes. He noticed, after about the second minute, that he had not mentioned Cian once. He sent the voice note. He put his phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling and did not examine the not mentioning. Aisha's response came at 7:40 in the morning, which was 8:40 her time, which meant she'd been awake and she'd listened to the whole thing before responding. Dom, she said, I have now listened to the parking lot story 3 times. I need you to hear something. A pause, the pause she used when she was about to say the real thing. You're not talking about Cian. He put the phone face down again. He lay there for a while. Then he got up, made himself presentable, and went to do his job. Chapter 13, Wrong Subject. The hotel bar was not the kind of place Sin Jun Ho went. They talked. The conversation had a shape that surprised Dominic. Not the interview Sin gave, not the performative warmth he deployed in variety appearances, and not the flat economy of his editorial communications. It was something else. He was sharper and private, and occasionally kind in ways that were quick and precise and then gone, like something he didn't fully intend to let out. He talked about the Osaka venue sight lines with an exactness that was clearly technical knowledge, not general commentary. He talked about the tour's Asia leg with the considered fatigue of someone who had been doing this for a long time and had made his peace with it while retaining the specific friction of its reality. He was interesting. He was, Dominic noted, with the particular quality of noting things that came after a long time of almost knowing, genuinely interesting. Not the poster on his wall. Not the projected presence in Novus official content. The person in front of him with his drink and his specific way of looking at the middle distance when he was saying something true. He was interesting, and Dominic was listening, and he was aware, the awareness arriving not dramatically, but with a quiet, precise quality, like the moment you see the shape in a photograph you've been looking at too close. He was aware that he had spent the last 10 minutes in his own head not with what Cian was saying, but with something Sol had said 3 days ago in the loading bay. Specifically, small things are specific. I like specific. He had not been in the loading bay when Sol said it. He had been in the loading bay. But in the hotel bar with Cian, the sentence kept arriving back. The way things arrived back when they had weight. You went quiet, Cian said. So Dominic came back. You were saying the second show's blocking. I wasn't. Cian looked at him with the reading the room quality. You were gone somewhere. What were you thinking about? It was not exactly a question. It was a statement made interrogative, the way Cian occasionally made statements, and it required an answer. Dominic said, something Sol said. The other night, it's been rattling around. He had not meant to say Sol's name. He had been about to say something vague, a work thought, a content consideration, something that would pass without examination. And instead he had said Sol's name, which was accurate and also, in the context of a late-night drink with Cian, possibly legible in ways he hadn't prepared for. Cian looked at him, not the assessment look, the specific other one, the one Dominic had seen once before, the actually reading something look, unhurried and more particular. He held it for a moment. Sol has a habit, Cian said finally, of saying things that rattle. He said it without inflection and picked up his glass and drank. Dominic opened his mouth to respond. Cian was already looking at the bar again, already moving the conversation somewhere else, asking about the Tokyo platform data with the clean redirect of someone who had said what he meant and needed no follow-up. Dominic followed the redirect. He answered the question. He talked about the platform data. He was in a hotel bar with Cian Juno, who was interesting and occasionally kind and looking at Dominic like a person, which was everything Dominic had told himself he wanted from this job. And he was thinking about Seoul. They finished their drinks at midnight. Cian paid, which Dominic registered with a surprised blink, and which Cian performed with the total lack of ceremony of someone for whom financial transactions were logistics rather than gestures. "Good work on the Osaka leg," Cian said at the door of the bar. He said it looking at the elevator rather than at Dominic, which was how Dominic knew he meant it. "The framing is accurate. Keep that." "I will." Cian went to the elevator. The doors closed. Dominic stood in the doorway of the hotel bar for a moment, and then he went to the car the label had arranged for the staff, and he sat in the back seat while the car moved through the late-night city, and he thought about the hotel bar conversation. He thought about the specificity of Cian in person. He thought about the debut showcase, 3 run-throughs, the nerves used up on the first 2. He thought about the quality of Cian's attention when it was real, which was different from the performance of attention he deployed so fluently that they were almost identical if you weren't looking carefully. He thought about Cian saying Seoul has a habit of saying things that rattle, and the quality of flat recognition in it. The specific tone of someone who was not surprised by the information and was choosing not to engage with what it implied. He was in the car for 35 minutes. He thought about Cian for the first 5. The other 30, he was thinking about the loading bay. He got back to the hotel. He went to his room. He opened his laptop and the private document, and he looked at the blank line at the bottom of it, the place where the next entry went. He wrote, "Hotel bar with Cian. It was what I thought I wanted, and it was good. And at some point in the middle of it, I was somewhere else entirely." He wrote, "I think I've been looking at." He stopped. He looked at the cursor. He closed the laptop. He was not ready. The sentence was true, and it was pointed somewhere specific, and it was not a sentence he was ready to finish, because finishing it would make it a sentence, and a sentence was a thing you could not unknow, and he had built the last 2 months on careful not knowing, and he was not ready to put that down yet. He went to sleep with the cursor blinking in his mind where the sentence had been, unfinished, waiting. Chapter 14, Cian, actually. He did not finish the sentence in the morning. He closed the laptop the night before and opened it in the morning, and the document was there with the cursor where he'd left it, and he read the last 2 lines, "Hotel bar with Cian. It was what I thought I wanted," and he closed the document and made coffee and decided, with the clean deliberateness of someone who had decided something and was going to commit to it, that he was going to stop being confused about this. He knew what he wanted. He had always known what he wanted. He had applied for this job because of Sin Jun-ho had spent 6 years building toward the specific reality of being in the same rooms as this person, and now he was in the same rooms, and the hotel bar conversation had been good. Sin was interesting and occasionally kind, and the conversation had been real in a way that Dominic hadn't expected and was now recalibrating around. That was the thing that had thrown him. Not the absence of feeling, but the different quality of it. The feeling of meeting a person rather than arriving at a destination. That was good. That was what he'd wanted, if he was being honest. Not the poster on the wall, but the actual person. And the actual person was, it turned out, accessible. Was starting to look at Dominic like something other than a piece of equipment. Was remembering, without being asked, the specific way Dominic took his coffee. That last one had happened on a Tuesday. He'd come into the content suite in the morning, and there had been a coffee on his desk. Not a generic coffee, the specific order, the one that the hotel restaurant had required 2 attempts to get right, and which Dominic had ordered 3 more times since to calibrate them. The coffee was correct. The only person who had been in the content suite before Dominic that morning was Cian. He had stared at it. Then he had sat down and opened his laptop and been professionally competent for the rest of the day, and he had written in the private document that night. Cian remembered the coffee order. He didn't acknowledge doing it. He just did it and left. These are the ways he cares about things, probably. quietly, deniably, in a way that requires you to be paying attention to notice. And then he had written below that, I notice everything he does. I have been noticing everything he does for 6 years. This is not a new skill. Both of those things were true. He had filed them as true and moved on. So, he was going to lean into this. The hotel bar was one conversation. There would be more. He had evidence of Cian's attention, the coffee, the small corrections, the way he'd said keep, that about the framing with the particular quality of someone offering something they didn't usually offer. He had the hotel bar, which was unprecedented and which Cian had initiated, which mattered. He had 4 more months of this job, and the knowledge, finally solid after 3 of them, that the actual Cian was someone Dominic could be in a room with without managing his own reactions to the point of exhaustion. He could do this. He was going to do this. He was going to be a person who wanted a thing and pursued it correctly, which was what Aisha had been telling him to do for 6 years, and which he was finally, maturely, going to do. He spent the next 2 weeks doing it. More time in Cian's orbit. Not fabricated. He didn't manufacture reasons to be in the same space, because that was both unprofessional and detectable, and Cian was not someone you could manage that obviously, but available. Present. When the natural architecture of the tour schedule put them in proximity, Dominic didn't redirect it. He was in the content suite early, the way he'd been since week 1, and Cian continued to arrive and review the content and occasionally say things. The things Cian said were slightly different now. Not warm, exactly. Cian did not do warm in any uncomplicated way, but attentive. The specific attention of someone who had begun to see a person rather than a function. He corrected Dominic's Korean pronunciation of a lyric one afternoon. They were in the media room, and something was playing from the run-through footage, and Dominic sang 2 bars under his breath without thinking about it. The habit of 6 years of knowing Nova's discography thoroughly. And Cian looked up and said the correct pronunciation with the flat certainty of a person for whom incorrectness was a condition that needed to be addressed. He looked, immediately after, slightly annoyed at himself. Dominic did not know what to do with the annoyed at himself part. So he filed it and said thank you, and Cian went back to what he was doing. Small things. Possibly meaning things, or possibly the habits of a person who noticed details, because that was how he was built, and Dominic was simply another detail. He was aware of the possible second interpretation. He was choosing not to dwell on it. The problem with the second interpretation was that he kept arriving back at it from unexpected angles, like a path that looked clear until you were already on it and realized where it went. He would be sitting with the things Cian had done, the coffee, the pronunciation correction, the way he'd said the framing is accurate with the quality of something meant, and he would start to build the structure that connected them into something, and then he would hit a wall that was not a lack of evidence, but a specific kind of honesty that he kept trying not to have, and kept having anyway. The honesty was this. He did not know if what he felt in Cian's company was what he wanted, or what he had always wanted, wanting to be something. These were different things. He knew they were different things. He had written enough words about enough things to know the difference between a feeling and the shape of a feeling that was supposed to be there. He sat with the distinction for approximately 48 hours and then put it down because he was not ready to follow it, and sometimes not following was the right thing. On a Thursday, in the green room before a press day, Sol was in the room. This was not unusual. Sol was often in rooms. In the quiet way he occupied spaces without requiring them to rearrange around him. What was unusual was the specific configuration. Cian and Dominic were talking about the press day content schedule, which was a real conversation with a real professional purpose, and Sol was sitting 2 chairs over doing something on his laptop. Dominic was mid-sentence when he noticed Sol looking at them. Not pointed looking, not accusatory or even particularly interested, just the general, mild quality of someone who was aware of what was happening in their periphery. But Dominic had spent enough time now observing Sol's attention to know when it was general and when it was specific, and this was specific. Sol was watching the Cian Dominic dynamic with an expression that Dominic looked at for half a second and then looked away from, because reading it correctly would have required him to follow the thing he decided not to follow. He looked away. He finished the sentence about the press day content schedule. Sol closed his laptop, stood up, and went to the kitchen area at the back of the green room. He came back a few minutes later with 4 bottles of water and set them on the table without comment. One for Cian, one for Dominic, one for Ewan, who was across the room, one for himself, and sat back down. He opened his laptop again. He did not look at them again. Dominic registered this as a character trait. Sol made food and distributed water and steadied camera rigs and sat in stairwells. He was a person who took care of things. It was a character trait, and character traits were not messages, and he was going to let it be a character trait. He was very reasonable about this. He wrote in the private document that night, "I keep seeing Sol in the margins of the Cian chapters. I don't know what that means narratively, so I'm going to leave it alone." He looked at the sentence. He wrote, "I know what it means narratively." He closed the document. Chapter 15, The Tour Bible. The meeting with Suri was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Wednesday, which was the kind of scheduling detail that told Dominic exactly how seriously to take it. 10 a.m. on a Wednesday was not an emergency, and it was not casual. It was a meeting that had been put in the calendar with deliberate timing by a person who thought about timing the way other people thought about punctuation. He arrived at her temporary office, a commandeered venue room, during the Bangkok prep, with her desk positioned exactly as it had been at the label in Seoul, which was a detail about her that Dominic found clarifying, at 9:58. He sat down across from her. She offered him water. He accepted. "Your work has been excellent," she said. This was the first sentence. Dominic had been in enough professional meetings to know that the first sentence, when it was a compliment, was the context setting before something else. "Thank you," he said. "Your engagement metrics are among the strongest the group's channels have recorded." She had a tablet on the desk and was not looking at it, which meant she already knew what was on it. The content quality since the Seoul leg has been notably above what the label typically sees from this role. The behind-the-scenes archive in particular has been cited by 3 separate fan communities as the most authentic documentation of a Nova tour to date. "I'm glad it's landing." Suri folded her hands on the desk. She had the quality of a person who gave bad news without cruelty, which meant she had done it often enough to develop the skill. "Some of your recent content choices," she said, "have shown an unusual editorial perspective." Dominic kept his expression professionally neutral. "In what way?" "The Seoul Baek photographs. There have been 4 in the last 2 weeks in the behind-the-scenes archive, where the framing is noticeably attentive. These are not official portraits, not stage content. They're candid in a way that is, strictly speaking, within the approved material. The previous content manager would have missed it." She said it factually and moved on to the calendar specifics, and Dominic spent the rest of the meeting being professionally present while some part of his brain was occupied elsewhere. He left the meeting at 10:42. He walked to the end of the corridor and stopped and stood there for a moment. The meeting had been fair. He knew it had been fair. Suri was nothing if not fair, and the fairness was the thing that made it land clean rather than soft. She hadn't been wrong. The Seoul photographs were attentive. The captions had been personal in ways that were technically invisible but structurally present, and he had known that while writing them, and had done it anyway, the way you did things when you were not yet ready to name why. She had not said stop feeling something. She had said the job and whatever is in your private document are incompatible. Not in those words. In more calibrated and professional words. But that was the sentence underneath her sentence. He went back to his room. He opened the laptop. He opened the private document. He had been adding to it for weeks. He had not read it in full since the hotel in Osaka, the night after the Osaka second show, when he had read it and noticed the shape of it for the first time. He read it now. He read it from the beginning. He read the stairwell entry and the media room entry and the loading bay and the parking lot and every soul-adjacent thing he had written while telling himself he was observing rather than feeling. He read the photograph note from the rehearsal, the 17 out of 47. He read, "I think I've been looking at," and the place where the sentence stopped. He read the whole thing. When he finished, the time on his laptop was 12:17. The document was unambiguous. It was not hidden, not coded, not doing anything other than the thing it was doing. Being a private record of a person falling slowly and specifically in love with someone they had been careful not to look at directly. He could see it plainly, the way you could see a shape in a photograph once someone pointed it out to you. How had he not seen it? He had been inside it, which was how. You couldn't see a shape from inside it. You needed distance, and Suri had given him that accidentally and impeccably. And now he was sitting in a hotel room in Bangkok with a document on his screen that was clearly, unmistakably, beautifully about Seoul. He closed the document without adding anything. He sat in a chair for a long time. He thought about the job. He thought about the tour, for months left, and the careful professional architecture that Suri maintained around all of them, and the line she had described. He thought about his contract, which ran through January, and which was contingent on things that did not include whatever was happening in his private document. He opened a new content draft for the Bangkok fan event on Thursday. He started writing. He wrote for 2 hours. It was clean, professional work, the good kind, the kind that understood the difference between emotional intelligence and personal investment, the kind that kept the feeling in but kept the feeling at the correct distance. He sent the draft to the shared calendar. He did not open the private document again. He sent Aisha a voice note that was 6 minutes long, which was shorter than his recent ones, and which was mostly about the Suri meeting and the content feedback and the very reasonable and professional things Suri had said, and which was entirely not about the document or what he had seen in it when he read it for the first time since Osaka. Aisha's response was 7 seconds long. "Okay, but actually," she said, which was the phrase she used when she was about to say the real thing. "Dom, what are you going to do?" He didn't answer the voice note that night. He thought about it. Instead, in the way he thought about things he wasn't ready to write, at the edge of sleep, where the thinking was less controlled and more honest, where the management came off and what was underneath sat up and looked at him plainly. What was he going to do? He was going to do his job. He was going to be professional and accurate, and keep the distance Suri had named. He was going to spend 4 more months in rooms with Seoul without doing anything irresponsible, because he was a person who understood consequences, and because the job mattered, and because whatever was in the private document was private and was going to stay that way. He was going to be fine about it. He was absolutely not going to be fine about it. He touched the back of his neck in the dark and didn't notice and went to sleep. Chapter 16. Min Jae knows. Bangkok was loud in a way that was different from the other cities on the tour. Tokyo had been loud in the organized, pressurized way of a place where everything ran to a schedule and the noise was a function of density rather than temperament. Osaka had been loud in the specific register of a city that knew how to have a good time and had been doing it long enough to be efficient about it. Bangkok was loud in the way of a place that had decided to mean it. The streets, the tuk-tuks, the particular quality of night air that felt like it was already celebrating something, though Dominic couldn't have said what. He had been in Bangkok for 6 days. He had learned 3 routes from the hotel to the venue, the name of the woman who ran the coffee cart outside the stage door, and the precise location of a 24-hour convenience store that sold the good brand of electrolyte drinks, which was information Seoul had mentioned during the Osaka leg in the same flat. Useful way, he mentioned things like platform, timing windows, and the correct pronunciation of Korean lyrics. Dominic had not asked for the information. Seoul had offered it because they were discussing long stretches between proper meals, and Seoul knew the answer and offered it, which was what Seoul did. He had been carefully not thinking about this. He was in the backstage corridor on a Tuesday afternoon, between the end of sound check and the start of the evening content run, with his laptop open on the equipment case he'd been using as a makeshift desk. The corridor was temporarily quiet. Most of the tour staff were in the venue's main prep area, and the members had scattered in the way they scattered between calls. He had 40 minutes and a caption set he needed to have drafted before the evening run, and he was 3 captions in and making decent progress when Min Jae appeared. Min Jae did not appear so much as materialize. One moment, the corridor was empty, and then Min Jae was leaning against the wall across from Dominic with his arms folded and the specific expression of someone who had been building to a conversation for a while and had selected this moment with care. Dominic looked at him. "No," Dominic said. "You keep saying that," Min Jae said, "and then the thing happens anyway. I have 40 minutes and 3 captions left. This will take less than 40 minutes. Min Jae pushed off the wall and pulled the equipment case beside Dominic's into the corridor and sat on it. He sat with the comfortable confidence of someone who had decided the space was theirs now. He was wearing a hoodie that had a small hot sauce stain near the left pocket, which was information Dominic's brain logged automatically and without his consent. He folded his arms again. "Okay," he said. "So, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it. And before you figure out a way to answer it that's technically true and also a complete non-answer, I want you to know that I have been conducting research." Dominic closed his laptop halfway. Research. Documentation. Min-jae unfolded one arm and produced his phone with the air of someone presenting evidence in a tribunal. I'm a person who pays attention. You know this. You've seen the evidence folder. The point is, I noticed something in month 2 that seemed interesting, and I made a note of it. And then the note became several notes, and the several notes became... He turned the phone to show Dominic the screen. It was a spreadsheet, not a casual list. A spreadsheet with columns and color coding and what appeared to be a date-stamped entry for each row. The columns were labeled, in Minji's distinctive all-lowercase style, what Dom said, who it was technically about, who it was actually about. There were approximately 40 rows. Dominic looked at the spreadsheet. He looked at it for a while. "That's color-coded," he said. "Green for Cian, blue for Seoul," Min-jae said, with the serenity of someone who had prepared for this reaction. "There's a legend in the bottom tab." Dominic scrolled. The green cells, the ones in the who was technically about column, outnumbered the blue cells in the early rows. Then, somewhere around row 12, the balance shifted. By the later rows, almost all the who was technically about cells were green, and almost all the who was actually about cells were blue. "I've been tracking it for 2 months, Min-jae said. "I have the methodology documented in the notes column." "You have a methodology." "Dumb." Min-jae took the phone back. His voice had lost the performance register, not the warmth, which was always there underneath everything, but the comic timing. He sounded like himself, which was different from his usual mode and more alarming for it. "You know what I'm going to say. I know what you're going to say. So I'm going to say it anyway, because that's the kind of friend I am. You only talk about Seoul." He said it simply, without the spreadsheet energy, without any ammunition attached to it. Like, when you think you're complaining about seeing, or talking about work, or doing the voice note thing you do where you go for 11 minutes, you're actually just describing Seoul. The spreadsheet is just the proof. I've been watching it for 2 months, and I needed you to see the data, because you are very good at dismissing things that don't have data. Dominic looked at his laptop. He thought about the private document. He thought about the Suri meeting a week ago and what he had seen when he read the document in full for the first time. He thought about the unfinished sentence with its cursor blinking. He opened his mouth. "That's not," he started. "Dom," said Min-jae, with the patience of a man who had been watching a slow-motion disaster long enough to find it affectionate. "It's very much that." Dominic closed his mouth. He looked at the corridor wall across from him. It was a neutral institutional color, cream or off-white, with a cable channel running along the baseboard that disappeared around a corner. There was a poster about emergency exits that he had read twice since arriving in Bangkok, because it was the thing you looked at when you didn't want to look at anything else. He had been managing this for 2 months. He had been careful and professional and had not done anything with it and had maintained the distance and had written it all in a document labeled "Do Not Post" and had told himself that was enough. That was the right call, that being aware of something and not acting on it was the mature and responsible version of the thing. The spreadsheet had 40 rows. "Okay," Dominic said. Min-jae waited. "Okay. That is," he put his hand over his mouth for a second. "Put back down." "Okay. Yeah," Min-jae said. "How long have you known?" "I knew before the spreadsheet." "The spreadsheet is just me being thorough." He was quiet for a moment. "Ewan knows too." "Not for me. Ewan just knows things. Taekwon probably knows, but Taekwon doesn't file things as significant unless they are operationally relevant. So he hasn't said anything." A pause. "Cian has known for a while." "Cian has known," Dominic repeated. "Cian notices things. You know this." Min-jae put his phone away. "He hasn't said anything to you. He probably won't. But he knows." Dominic thought about the hotel bar. He thought about Cian paying for the drinks without ceremony and saying, "Keep that about the framing," and Seoul has a habit of saying things that rattle. He thought about the specifically unreadable quality of Cian's expression when he looked at Dominic sometimes, which Dominic had been reading as assessment and might have been something else entirely. "And Soul," Dominic said. The question came out differently than he intended. Less managed. Min-jae looked at him with an expression that was careful in a way Min-jae rarely bothered to be. "That's not my data to give you," he said. Dominic nodded. He hadn't expected a different answer. He wasn't sure what he would have done with a different answer. He was still sitting with this, with the spreadsheet and the 40 rows and the 2 months and the particular quality of having the thing he had been protecting himself from knowing handed to him in color-coded form by a person with a methodology when the door at the end of the corridor opened. Soul came through it. He stopped when he saw them, not surprised, exactly, but taking in the specific composition of the corridor. Dominic on his equipment case. Min-jae on the other one. The quality of the silence between them, which was probably legible. Soul looked at Dominic's face. It was a brief look, maybe 2 seconds, but it was the specific quality of Soul's full attention, which was not casual and not oblique. It was the look he gave things when he was actually reading them, and what it read in Dominic's face Dominic could not know, but he watched something move across Soul's expression in response to whatever it found. Not a word, not a performance. Something underneath, quick and visible and real, the kind of thing that happened when you weren't choosing your expression carefully enough. Then from inside the venue, through the closed door, Sian's voice calling for rehearsal. The specific authority of it, the room-rearranging quality. Soul's expression settled back. He held Dominic's gaze for one more second. 1 second that was its own entire sentence, though Dominic could not have translated it precisely, and then he turned and went back through the door. Min-jae and Dominic sat in the corridor in the silence after. "Okay," Min-jae said eventually. "Maybe I do have some data on that one." He stood up, put his equipment case back where he'd found it, and went inside. Dominic sat in the corridor for a moment longer. He looked at the emergency exit poster. He thought about 40 rows in a spreadsheet and 2 months and the specific quality of 2 seconds of Soul's attention in a doorway, which had not been the general mild attention Soul moved through the world with, but something else, something that had moved across his face like weather, briefly and completely real. He opened his laptop. He opened the caption set. He did not write any captions for approximately 11 minutes, which was how long it took his nervous system to return to something that could be called professional. Then he wrote 3 captions. They were accounting for the 11 minutes, still technically on time. He sent them to the content calendar. He did not open the private document. He was going to sit with the spreadsheet data for a while before he added anything to the document, because the document was already doing something he wasn't ready to accelerate, and the 40 rows were enough truth for one afternoon. He sent Aisha a voice note from the hotel that night. He talked for 9 minutes. He told her about the spreadsheet. He told her about the methodology. He told her that Min-jae had color-coded it, which prompted a sound from Aisha that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh, and which lasted for 4 of the 9 minutes. He told her about the corridor. He told her about Soul in the doorway, and the 2 seconds and the specific quality of whatever had been in Soul's expression, which he described 3 different ways and still could not land on the right one. He told her he didn't know what to do. Aisha's response arrived at 11:42 and was 1 minute and 7 seconds long. "Dominic," she said, full name, which meant real talk. "I've been listening to you not know what to do about this for 2 months. I need you to hear me. You know exactly what to do. You have known for a while. The question you're actually asking is whether you're brave enough to do it, and that I can't answer for you." A pause. "But I will say this. The spreadsheet has 40 rows. That means it's been true for at least 40 moments. That's not an accident. That's not a calibration period. That's a story you're in the middle of, and the only thing keeping you from the next part is you." He listened to it twice. He put his phone on the nightstand. He looked at the ceiling for a long time. He did not come to any conclusions, exactly. What he came to was something quieter than a conclusion. The recognition that the thing he had been managing was not manageable anymore, had probably not been manageable for a while, and that the effort he was putting into the management was coming from somewhere that had other uses. He did not do anything with this recognition. Not tonight. Tonight he was going to go to sleep, and tomorrow he was going to do his job, and the day after that was Kuala Lumpur, and something was going to have to happen eventually, but it was not going to be tonight. He went to sleep. He did not touch the back of his neck. Chapter 17, The Other Side of Wanting. The Kuala Lumpur event was not a show. It was a brand partnership activation, the kind of evening that the tour's commercial infrastructure required periodically, where Novi appeared in a curated space for an audience of industry and media people and performed the version of themselves that sold things. Not a concert, not a fan event, something in between, a showcase with a set list of 3 songs, a cocktail hour, a press junket corridor where Dominic ran the content. Polished in the specific way of something that had been produced rather than built. He had been preparing for it since Bangkok. The content strategy was clean and detailed and had been approved without revision, which he took as evidence that he had correctly read what the event required, which was the aspirational emotional resonance language from the agency brief, the kind of content that felt like something without actually feeling anything. He could write that. He had always been able to write that. It was only recently that it had started to cost him something to do it. He told himself he was going to try one more time. Not in those words exactly, not as a formal decision, more as a quiet internal positioning. He was going to be present to whatever happened with Cian tonight. He was going to let himself want the thing he had originally wanted without editing it. And he was going to see what it felt like to do that now that the spreadsheet existed and the private document had 9 pages and he had sat in a Bangkok corridor with Min Jae and been given 40 rows of evidence about himself. He was going to try. Once more. Because he was a person who was thorough about things. The event was in a hotel ballroom, high floor, the city visible through the tall windows in a way that was deliberately cinematic. Nova arrived, coordinated and polished, which they always were in these contexts, but which was more visibly effortful here. The industry and media crowd required a different register from a concert audience, and the group had calibrated accordingly. Cian in particular was precisely himself. The version of him that wore the room like a garment, that moved through cocktail hour small talk with the efficiency of someone who had learned to do it so well that it no longer required the full reserve. He was magnetic. Dominic knew he was magnetic because he had spent 6 years documenting it, and because he was watching him now across a ballroom and registering it the way you registered things that were objectively true, accurately, without the accompanying feeling he had spent 6 years expecting it to produce. There was a feeling. It was not nothing, but it had a different texture now, not the specific warmth he was used to, the fandom-adjacent warmth that had lived in his chest since 21, but something more clinical. Something that registered Cian's magnetism the way you registered good architecture. Appreciative. Correct. Not the thing that moved you to do something about it. He ran the content. He was good at it. He got the shots that the event required, and he wrote the captions that the brand partnership needed, and he posted them in the right windows, and the engagement was appropriate. At the end of the formal portion of the evening, Cian found him near the press corridor. He had the barely there smile. The one that appeared only when something had genuinely surprised him, rare enough to be significant. He looked at Dominic with it for a moment, and Dominic noticed it, and noticed what he felt when he noticed it, which was warmth and recognition, and the particular appreciation of seeing a person he had come to know being briefly unguarded. Good coverage tonight, Cian said. The light in here was cooperative. It wasn't. He said it without elaboration, which was the compliment. He knew the light had been difficult, and he knew Dominic knew, and they were both acknowledging the difficulty without making a thing of it. The second song, the angle you used, it was correct. Thank you. Cian looked at him for a moment. The smile was gone, but the quality of his attention remained, and there was something in it. Dominic had learned to read the registers of his attention, had spent 2 months calibrating, something that was not quite the editorial look, not quite the assessment. Something warmer. Something that was, if he was going to be honest about it, the closest Cian got to the kind of warmth that in other people would be called affection. And Dominic stood in it and felt warm and seen and correctly identified, and absolutely nothing that moved him toward the next thing. He thought about what he wanted, and he found it, and it was not in this room. The thought arrived without drama. Not a revelation, not a crisis, just a fact, landing with the particular quality of facts that had been true for a while and were only now being looked at directly. He was standing in front of the thing he had spent 6 years wanting, and it was not moving him. The want was there, somewhere. The 6 years were still in his chest, the debut showcase, the anniversary post, the poster on his wall. But the want and the man in front of him had stopped being the same thing. and the gap between them was specific and had a name. Sin, he said. Thank you. For I don't know. The last few months. He said it carefully, in the way of someone who was choosing how much truth to put in a sentence. This wasn't the job I expected. Cian looked at him with the real attention. What did you expect? I don't know. Not this. That's not an answer. No. Dominic looked at him. I thought I knew what I wanted from this. I was wrong about some of it. I'm still sorting out which parts. Cian was quiet for a moment. He had the look that meant he was saying something real, looking at the middle distance rather than at Dominic. Being wrong about what you want, he said slowly, is not the same as having wanted incorrectly. He said it like a thing he was still working out himself. The wanting was real. It just had the wrong address. He picked up his drink from a passing tray. Good coverage, he said again, and moved back into the room. Dominic stood in the press corridor. He stood there for a minute, maybe two. He thought about the wrong address. He thought about 6 years of it, Nova Archive and the private document and the 40 rows in the spreadsheet and the unfinished sentence from Osaka. He thought about 2 seconds in a Bangkok corridor and a loading bay in the dark and a stairwell at 11:58 p.m. He thought about what Cian had said with the quality of someone giving advice by observation and walking away before anyone could ask follow-up questions, which was exactly how Cian gave advice, which meant he had just been given advice and Cian had known he was giving it. He pulled out his phone. He opened the Nova copy, drafts, do not post document. He scrolled to the bottom. He read, I think I've been looking at. He put his thumb on the screen. The cursor blinked. He wrote the rest of the sentence. He wrote, I think I've been looking at the wrong thing. I have known this for a while. The knowing and the saying it are different, and I have been staying in the gap between them because the gap is safer than either end. I have 9 pages of evidence. I have a color-coded spreadsheet that someone else made. I have Cian Juno telling me in a hotel ballroom in Kuala Lumpur that the wanting was real and had the wrong address. He wrote, the address is Seoul. He looked at the sentence. He read it again. He did not delete it. Across the room, someone had redirected the lights for the closing portion of the evening. The ballroom was warmer now, amber and low, the city through the windows doing something beautiful with the sky above the Petronas Towers. The group had reconvened near the stage for the final portion of the activation. Dominic looked across the room. Cian was at the center of it, doing the thing he did best, inhabiting the room, being looked at, making the being looked at seem like a gift rather than transaction. He was doing it well. He was doing it like himself. Seoul was on the far left of the formation, talking to a nervous junior staff member, not a member of the tour's regular crew, someone from the local venue team who had been trailing the group for the press portion and who had, in the chaos of the cocktail hour, dropped the equipment she was carrying twice. Seoul had his hands in his jacket pockets and was saying something to her in a low, even voice, and she was nodding with the specific quality of someone whose nerves were settling. He was not performing attentiveness. He was just attending. Then, in the natural drift of people in a room, Seoul looked up. He found Dominic's eye. It lasted half a second. Less. A glance that knew where it was going and landed and then, deliberately, looked somewhere else. In the half second before it looked away, Dominic saw something in it. The same thing that had been in the Bangkok doorway, briefly and completely real. The thing he had not been able to translate into words. He could translate it now. He went back to his phone. He read the sentence again. The address is Seoul. He closed the document. He put his phone in his pocket. He went back to doing his job and did it well for the rest of the evening and did not look at Seoul again because he did not trust himself to look at Seoul again and then do his job, and he needed to do his job, and the knowing and the doing were still different things and were going to be different things for a little while longer. But the sentence existed now. He had written it, and he had not deleted it, and unlike the wrong tab and the caption that was coming, and something in him knew it was coming, had always known, had been building toward it in the way of a paragraph that can only end one way. Unlike those, this was entirely private. This was his. Singapore was hot in the way of a city that had decided heat was simply the condition of existence and had stopped negotiating with it. The humidity wrapped around you the moment you stepped outside and stayed there, a constant companion, the kind of climate that made Dominic's hair curl at the back of his neck by 8 in the morning and stayed curled until midnight. He had been in Singapore for 4 days. He was in the wings during the first show's second act, running the live coverage, phone warm in his hand from the continuous use and the ambient heat of the venue lights. The show was running well. Nova's precision was, if anything, sharper at this point in the tour than it had been in Seoul, the kind of sharpening that happened when the same people did the same thing well enough times that the doing of it became its own form of knowledge. He got the shots. He wrote the captions. The engagement numbers climbed in real time. Between the second and third songs, in the brief window of the set transition, he was reviewing the last post metrics when Seoul came off stage left. This was logistically normal. Seoul's position in the second act formation put him on the stage left side, and the wing position was a common transit point during transitions. What was less normal was that Seoul stopped when he reached the wing instead of continuing to the quick change area and stood beside Dominic for the 45 seconds of the transition, close enough that Dominic was aware of the particular quality of warmth that came off a person who had been performing for 40 minutes in a warm venue. Seoul didn't say anything. He was breathing, slightly elevated, the controlled breath of someone managing exertion, and he had his eyes on the stage in a way of someone tracking the cue that would send him back out. His arm was almost touching Dominic's. Almost. The cue hit. Seoul went back out. Dominic looked at his phone. The last post metrics were still on screen. He had no memory of what the numbers said. He wrote the caption for the next post, and it was good, and he posted it, and he was professional for the rest of the show, which he considered a significant personal achievement. The photograph appeared the next morning. He found it because Min Jae sent it to him. No message, just the link, which arrived at 7:43 a.m. while Dominic was still horizontal on the hotel bed. And when he clicked through it, took him to a post on one of the major Nova fan accounts, with approximately 60,000 followers. The post was a photograph. The photograph was from the stage left wing during last night's show, taken by someone in the first few rows of the audience who had a good angle and apparently a very good camera. It showed Seoul and Dominic in the wing. Not dramatically, not in any way that was legible as anything specific. Two people standing in a venue wing during a show, one of them in performance clothes and the other in a dark shirt with a press pass, standing close. That was all. The bodies were angled toward the stage, not toward each other. It could have been two colleagues sharing a physical space. It was objectively two colleagues sharing a physical space. The caption the fan account had written read, "Iku the guy in the wing is, but Seoul has been looking in that direction since the second song. And I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying the staging usually has him exiting stage right." 60,000 followers. 412 comments. Dominic read 17 of them before he put the phone down. He picked it up again. He texted Min Jae, "How bad is it?" Minji, not bad Minji. Fandom speculation, not fandom conclusion Minji. Also, I would like to point out that the fan is right about the staging. Dominic put the phone face down. He was still processing this when Suri called. The call lasted 4 minutes and 32 seconds. He knew this because he was watching the timer on his screen with the specific focus of someone who needed to look at something neutral while the words arrived. Suri's voice was its usual professional, even quality, stripped of warmth by the nature of the topic rather than by any particular coldness in her. She said the post had been flagged internally. She said the label's social monitoring team had noted an uptick in speculation around Dominic specifically. She said the content that was coming from him was excellent, and she was not concerned about the professional output. "Please be mindful," she said, "of the professional boundary." "I understand," Dominic said. The call ended. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed with his phone in his hands and thought about the 45 seconds in the wing and the almost touching and the particular quality of standing next to someone and being aware of them in every sensory register while pretending you were only running the live coverage. He thought about being mindful of the professional boundary. He opened the private document. He looked at the sentence at the bottom. The address is Seoul. He read it. He closed the document. He wanted to do his job. The second Singapore show was that evening. He ran the content with the careful precision of someone who had been reminded professionally and clearly about the line. He stayed on the correct side of the wing. He got the correct shots. He maintained the correct distance. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. The management of his own presentation was, as Aisha had once pointed out in a voice note, one of his most developed skills, which was also one of his most limiting ones. He was packing up after the show, later than usual, the venue crew having needed the wing space, which had moved his equipment pack to the corridor adjacent, when he heard footsteps and then Sol was in the corridor. He stopped when he saw Dominic. "You're still here," Sol said. "Venue timing." Dominic closed the equipment case. "Go ahead, I'm almost done." Sol didn't go ahead. He came further into the corridor and stood with his back against the wall, jacket on, hands in his pockets, in a way he had of occupying spaces without requiring them to accommodate him. "I saw the post," he said. Dominic kept his hands on the equipment cases. He didn't look up. "I know." Suri called. "I know she did." A pause. The specific quality of a Sol pause, which was not empty. What did she say? The usual. Be mindful of the professional boundary. He locked the case. Stood up. He looked at Sol now, because looking at the equipment cases for the duration of this conversation would be its own kind of legible. She's not wrong. Sol looked at him. The full attention, the unblinking kind he deployed when he was being completely honest. "I don't think you need to be careful," he said. Dominic was very still. "I think," Sol said, with the specific deliberateness of someone who has been waiting to say a thing and has chosen the words in advance, "you are already being more careful than is good for you." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere down the hall a door opened and closed, and the sound traveled and disappeared. The venue was emptying out around them, the post-show deconstruction moving through the building floor by floor. Dominic looked at Sol. He thought about 7 things simultaneously, which was how his brain operated under conditions of significant input. The Suri call, the photograph, the almost touching in the wing, the private document, 9 pages, 40 rows in Minji spreadsheet, the sentence at the bottom of the document. He thought about seeing in a Kuala Lumpur ballroom, saying the wanting was real and had the wrong address. He thought about the loading bay and the stairwell and the media room at 3 a.m. He thought about what being more careful than is good for you actually cost, measured over months, measured in pages. He said Sol. Sol looked at him. "I know," Dominic said. He said it simply, without managing the framing. "I know I am." Something moved in Sol's expression. It was small, a degree of change, the kind that you only saw if you had been paying attention long enough to know his baseline. But it was there, and it was not neutral. It had the quality of something that had been held for a long time and had just been set down. He didn't say anything else. He looked at Dominic for a moment that had more in it than either of them was going to do anything about tonight, in a venue corridor after a show with Suri's 4-minute call, still sitting in both their recent histories. Then he said, "Good night, Dominic." He left. Dominic stood in the corridor with his equipment case and the closed door and the particular quality of air in a space where something has just happened that both people in it have agreed, without agreeing, to set down carefully and come back to. He went to his room. He opened his laptop. He opened the closing night content strategy, which he had been building in pieces since Singapore began. A folder called Closing Night Nova, official strategy that sat in the main content browser tab, ready to go, the work of the last 4 days. He was going to review the platform sequencing and the photo selection and the copy framework for the final show in Seoul, which was 3 weeks away, and then he was going to close the laptop and sleep. He opened the wrong tab. He did not notice immediately. He was looking at the document. His eyes were on it, but his brain was somewhere else, somewhere in a venue corridor with a closed door and the words "more careful than is good for you" sitting in the air, and it took him 40 seconds before he registered that what was on his screen was not the official content strategy. It was the private document. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time. He did not close it. He did not close it, and his eyes moved down the page, and the words were all there, 9 pages of them. Everything he had been writing in the careful private dark since the first week of the tour, and they were his, and they were honest, and they were the most accurate document he had ever produced. He should close the tab. He left it open. He stared at the screen for a while longer, in the way of someone who has been in a small dark room for a long time and has just found that the door opens from the inside. Then he went to sleep. He left both tabs open. He would think about this later and not be able to say whether he had known, in the way of things you know without letting yourself know them, what was coming. Whether the wrong tab had been an accident or the most honest thing he had done in weeks. Tonight, it was just an open document on a screen. Tonight, it was just both tabs. Tomorrow, the closing night was 3 weeks away, and the show tonight had been good, and Sol had said more careful than is good for you, and Dominic was going to be fine. He was fine. He went to sleep. Chapter 19 post. He was awake at 4 in the morning. This was not unusual at the end of a tour leg. His sleep patterns had been dismantling themselves gradually since Bangkok, victim of the accumulated time zone drift and the specific nervous system alertness of someone who had been professionally switched on for 6 months and could not reliably tell the difference anymore between awake for work and awake at 4 a.m. because his brain would not stop. He had learned to work with it. He made coffee in hotel rooms at 4 a.m., and he opened his laptop, and he worked because the alternative was lying in the dark, and he had run out of useful things to think about in the dark. The closing night was in 11 days. The agency had sent 7 emails overnight about the closing night content strategy. He had read all of them twice, and they were 8 pages long, and they used the phrase aspirational emotional resonance 4 times, and they wanted graphics with 3-point color palettes and caption pre-approval from 4 separate departments, and a post schedule that was calibrated to the minute, and Dominic had read all of it and implemented none of it. Because he had been doing this job for 6 months, and he knew the difference between content that felt like something and content that was designed to give the impression of feeling something from a safely managed distance. And he could not write the second kind anymore. He did not know exactly when he had stopped being able to write the second kind. He had the private document. He had the dates. He could probably triangulate. He did not need to triangulate. He knew. He opened his laptop. He had 2 tabs open because he had fallen asleep with 2 tabs open 3 nights ago and had not consciously reorganized them since. He looked at both of them, the official closing night content folder and the private document. He had been moving between them without particularly acknowledging that this was a thing he was doing the way you did things that you hadn't decided to do yet. He was awake at 4 in the morning. He was tired in the specific way of someone who was tired of something larger than sleep. He was awake, and the closing night was in 11 days, and in 11 days the tour would end, and his contract would either be renewed or it wouldn't, and he had known since the Suri meeting that the odds of renewal had been adjusted by his recent content choices, and he had known since the Singapore corridor that the sentence at the bottom of the private document was not going to shrink just because he had said "I know" and then gone to sleep. He was awake. He opened the private document. He had not added anything since the sentence about the address. He read it now. He read the whole 9 pages for the second time since he had read it in full the night of the Suri meeting, and it was the same as it had been then, clear, specific, unmistakably about one thing. And he understood something about it this time that he had not understood the first time he read it in full. It was good writing. Not good in the way of content copy or brand captions or even a fan account, which was also good in its way. Good in the way of something that had been written with the full weight of actual feeling behind every word, the way writing went when it stopped being a product and became a record. He had been writing this document for 6 months without knowing it was a document. He had thought it was a safety valve, a private archive of unposted things, the do not post folder taken to its logical extreme. It was not a safety valve. It was the real thing. He looked at the screen for a long time. Then he opened the closing night content strategy in the other tab. He read the agency's 8 pages. He looked at the pre-approved graphic templates and the caption framework and the aspirational emotional resonance language, and he thought about the closing night. He thought about what it would actually be. The last show, Seoul, the venue they had started in, Nova filling a stadium at the end of 8 months that had changed every expectation he had arrived with. He thought about what the closing night deserved to have said about it. He put his hands on the keyboard. He wrote the caption. He wrote it the way he had been writing in the private document, without managing the framing, without the professional remove, without the version of himself that stayed behind the camera. He wrote it the way the real things had been written, in the medium he knew best, in the voice that had always been his and that he had been trying to calibrate into something smaller for 6 months. He wrote about what he had been looking at and what he had actually seen. He wrote about 8 months of understanding, slowly and at considerable personal cost, the difference between the performance and the person, the product and the actual human being underneath it. He wrote about pointing a camera at the wrong subject for a very long time. He wrote the thing he had been writing in the private document without the privacy, without the do not post, in the full, unmanaged voice of someone who had stopped trying to shape the narrative. He wrote, even if this is the worst possible medium for saying it. He saved the document. He meant to save it to the private folder. He saved it to the official content schedule. The tab was still open. The content scheduler was already logged into the official channels. The closing night package had been pre-configured for posting because that was how the agency workflow functioned. Content was prepared in the scheduler and posted from there by the content manager, which was him, and the scheduler was set to require a manual confirmation before posting, which was a safety feature, which was the reason he was already moving the cursor toward the confirmation button before he had fully registered that the tab was the official scheduler and not the private document. He pressed confirm. The post went live at 4:41 a.m. He looked at the screen. He looked at the screen for approximately 40 seconds, which was the amount of time it took his brain to finish processing what had just happened. The post counter ticked. Once. 3 times. 8. The caption was live on the official Nova channel with 260,000 followers, and it was 4:41 in the morning, and he had pressed confirm. He closed the laptop. He opened it again. The post was still live. His phone started ringing. It was the agency. He did not answer it. He watched the engagement counter tick, which was a specific documented behavior of someone who had experienced a significant professional incident and whose nervous system had defaulted to observation because action was not yet available. His personal phone buzzed. A message from Ewan. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Dominic. Buddy. Then Min Jae. A screenshot of the post, captioned, I'm begging you to tell me this is about who I think it's about, followed by 17 consecutive laughing emojis. Then, 60 seconds later, also I'm not posting this anywhere you're safe. Probably. Then Taekwon, run. He stared at Taekwon's message. He thought about the fact that Taekwon, who spoke in short declarative sentences and did not elaborate unless asked, had used a word. A whole word. An imperative. That was significant. He filed this as significant. So had not texted him. Sol had not texted him either. The agency called again. And again. Sori's number appeared on the third call. He sat with the phone in his hands and let it ring and watched the engagement counter and thought about aspirational emotional resonance. The 7th voicemail was from a label department he had not previously had direct contact with. He sat. His phone buzzed with something different. Not a message from a known contact. A direct message notification from his personal account, from a username he didn't recognize. A string of numbers, no profile photo, 0 posts, 0 followers. A new account. Empty. Visual. He opened it. Did you mean it? He put the phone down on the bed. He picked it up. He looked at the message. He looked at it with the specific quality of looking that happened when your whole nervous system had been waiting for a particular signal without knowing it was waiting, and the signal had arrived. He knew. He did not know how he knew. The account was completely blank, a string of numbers, nothing attached to it. But he knew the way you knew a voice in a different register than its usual one, the way you knew a specific quality of silence that belonged to one person. He knew because the question was exactly the question. Not what were you thinking, or do you understand what you've done, or even who is this about, which would not have been a real question because Sol didn't need to ask who it was about. Sol had known, probably for weeks, probably longer. Did you mean it? Dominic got up. He walked to the window. He looked at the Seoul skyline in the pre-dawn, the city doing what cities did at 5 in the morning, continuing without him, indifferent and lit and entirely uninterested in his professional situation. He thought about 8 months. He thought about the stairwell and the media room and the loading bay and the Bangkok corridor and 40 rows in a spreadsheet and a sentence at the bottom of a document and an almost touching in a stage left wing and Seoul in a corridor in Singapore, saying more careful than is good for you. He sat back down. He typed every word. I'm sorry. He pressed send before he could think about it, because thinking about it was what he had been doing for 6 months, and he was done with that now. He was done with the thinking and the managing and the trying to stay on the correct side of lines that kept moving under his feet. He watched the typing indicator appear. It disappeared. It appeared again. Then a reply came through. It was a location pin. 14th floor, rooftop bar, the hotel they were in. The bar was closed at this hour. Dominic did not know how Sol had gotten up there, which meant Sol had figured it out, which was he was going to think about that later. He stood up. He looked at the elevator button in the corridor and then at the stairwell door and chose the stairwell because the elevator was too slow and too exposed, and he was a person who, when he had finally arrived at a decision, did not trust anything that required him to wait inside a small box while it processed. He pushed through the stairwell door. 14 floors. He went up. Chapter 20, 14 floors. The first landing was the lobby level, which he was already past, and the second was the mezzanine, and the third was where the fitness center was, and from the third landing upward the floors were just numbers on a door. He had not taken the stairs for any reason other than the elevator, which had been too slow. This was true. It was also true that the elevator would have been 30 seconds, and the stairs were going to be... He counted the remaining flights from 11 floors, which at the pace he was moving was going to be several minutes of deliberate effort. And he had chosen this, and the choosing of it was its own thing. He was at various points on the way up, absolutely certain this was a mistake. Not the sending of the message. Not every word, "I'm sorry," which had left his hands before his brain caught up, and which he had not regretted in the 30 seconds between sending it and the reply arriving. The mistake was, he was working out what the mistake was. Whether there was a mistake. Whether what he was calling the possibility of a mistake was actually just the familiar feeling of wanting something with his whole face, which he had spent the last 5 years carefully not doing, which his nervous system had learned to label as danger, because the last time he had done it someone had taken the distance and called it discomfort and eventually called it goodbye. He was 38 steps past the fourth landing. The fourth landing had been approximately. The caption is live, and there is no version of this that is professionally recoverable, and Suri is going to have things to say, and the agency has called 8 times, and everything he had built in 6 months of careful, competent work was in the process of being reassembled by forces outside his control, and he had done that. And it was a mistake in the professional sense, and he was not. In this stairwell, on the way to a rooftop at 5 in the morning. That was the thing he had landed on at the fourth landing. He was not sorry. The post was the wrong medium and the wrong moment, and the career consequences were going to be real, and he was not sorry, and the not being sorry was the most honest thing he had felt in months. The sixth landing, Cian had not texted him. He thought about this. Sin, who noticed things and remembered things, and had said in a Kuala Lumpur ballroom the wanting was real and had the wrong address. Sin had not texted him. Not the usual editorial message. Not a professional response to the professional situation. Not even the 4-second Taekwon-style single word. Nothing. He knew, at the sixth landing, what Cian's silence meant. It was not absence. Cian's silence was always a choice, and this particular silence meant, I am choosing not to fill the space that belongs to someone else. He was through the 7th landing before he fully understood that. The 8th landing. He had spent 6 years building a model of what he wanted, which he had thought was Cian, which had been not wrong, exactly the way the wanting had not been wrong, but incomplete. He had wanted the performance, the idol on the wall, the beautiful and difficult thing he could organize his sense of himself around. He had mistaken the clarity of that wanting for the truth of it. He had mistaken the safe, managed, carefully archived distance of watching for the real thing. And the real thing had been happening in the periphery the whole time, and he had been too busy maintaining the archive to look at it directly. He was breathing hard by the 9th landing. He was not particularly fit. His occupation for 6 years had been primarily sedentary, and the tour had not substantially changed this. His lungs were making a reasonable argument for the elevator. He kept going. The 10th landing. Sol's voice in the stairwell at 11:58 p.m. Whatever it is, it's probably not as visible as you think. Sol at the work table in the media room at 1 in the morning, not announcing himself, just there. Sol in the loading bay in the dark for 2 hours, because Dominic had said, I just need a minute, and Sol had taken that at face value and simply stayed. Sol saying you're easier to talk to than you look, which was the specific thing nobody had ever said to him, which was the most accurately observed thing anyone had said to him in years. The 11th landing. Minji's spreadsheet, 40 rows, the blue cells outnumbering the green cells in the later rows by a significant margin, color-coded with a legend in the bottom tab. The 12th landing, the document. 9 pages. The address is Seoul. He pushed through the door at the 12th landing too hard, and it hit the wall, and he caught on a rebound and kept moving. The 13th landing. He was completely out of arguments. He had used them all, over 6 months, in the document and in the voice notes and in the careful professional distance and in the management of his own face and in the conversations where he had said true things at an angle because saying them directly was too much exposure, and he was out of arguments, and the absence of them was not terrifying the way he had expected it to be. It was something else. The specific sensation of reaching the end of a very long thing and finding that the thing you had been afraid of on the other side of it was not a wall, but an opening. 14th floor. He pushed through the door. The rooftop bar was closed. The furniture stacked or wrapped. The bar surface bare. The city beyond the railing was doing the pre-dawn thing it did. The particular quality of Seoul skyline at 5 in the morning, the lights still going, but the quality of them changed. The dense residential towers and the commercial blocks and the Han River in the middle distance doing what rivers did at this hour, which was simply be there, persistent and moving. Seoul was at the railing. He was still in the clothes from the press event, which meant he had not gone back to his room, which meant he had come here directly from somewhere, which meant he had been waiting. He had his jacket off, folded over the railing beside him. His back was to the door. He did not turn around when Dominic pushed through. But Dominic saw his shoulders change. A small, deliberate thing, a settling, the release of something held. The quality of a person who had been listening for a specific sound and had heard it. Dominic walked to the railing. He stood next to Seoul. Dominic laughed. Short, involuntary, the real one, the one that surprised him when it came. I cannot believe Cian gave you dating advice about me. He didn't give advice. He made an observation and then walked away and refused to discuss it further. The corner of Seoul's mouth moved. Very on brand. Very on brand, Dominic agreed. The wind moved between them. Seoul reached over and tucked a loose thread at Dominic's jacket collar back into place. Just that, a small correction, the way he corrected everything, with quiet certainty and no fanfare, and left his hand there for a moment against Dominic's shoulder. The weight of it was specific. Specific in the way of something that had been in the periphery for 8 months and was now simply, finally, present. I'm not going to tell you this is simple, Seoul said. My career is complicated. Yours is currently on fire. My career is currently on fire, yes. The agency is going to want to manage this. I know, and I don't. He paused. The particular quality of choosing words with care, which Seoul did, and which Dominic had learned to wait for. I don't do things by halves. I want you to know that before you decide anything. I don't know how to care about something partially. Dominic looked at him. He looked the way he had not let himself look for months, without the professional distance, without the management, without the catalog of reasons. It was complicated. He looked at the way Seoul's eyes caught the city lights, the steadiness of him, the particular quality of his attention, which had been there, Dominic now understood, from almost the beginning, from before the stairwell, from before the media room, from the green room on the first day, when Seoul had steadied a camera rig without being asked and returned to his position on the floor and had not looked at Dominic to see if he'd noticed. He had always been steady. Dominic had simply not been standing still long enough to feel it. I know, Dominic said. That's why I posted it. Seoul looked at him for a long moment. Then the post is still live. I know. Your phone is going to keep ringing. I know that too. Dominic. Seoul kissed him. It was not the kind of kiss Dominic had imagined, in the careful small moments when he had let himself imagine it. It wasn't tentative or asking permission. Seoul kissed in the way he did everything, with complete intention, like a decision that had already been made and was now being enacted. One hand came up to Dominic's jaw and steadied him, and Dominic's hands found the front of Seoul's shirt and held on, and the city went on existing below them, indifferent and bright and entirely uninterested in them. When they broke apart, Dominic's chest was doing something structural. Something that felt like a load-bearing part of him had quietly shifted to a better position. The post, Seoul said, his voice slightly different. Still steady, but the steadiness had a different quality now, something warmer in it. Still not taking it down, Dominic said. He felt Soul's smile against his temple. Good. The Soul skyline held him. The wind off the rooftop was still cool, and Dominic was still slightly out of breath from 14 floors, and his career was still on fire in real time on a phone he was not answering, and Soul's hand was still on his jaw, and then moving to his shoulder and staying there, easy and certain, in a specific way as something that had decided where it was and wasn't going anywhere. Dominic looked at the city. He thought about the fan account post he had written this morning, which had started as a content note and was now the most honest thing he had ever posted in any medium. He thought about 6 years of archive, the whole careful distance of it, and the 8 months of being inside the thing instead of watching it from the outside, and the particular way a story felt different when you were in it versus when you were writing about it from safe remove. He was in it now. He had been in it for a while. He had just needed 14 floors and the right question to stop writing about it and start.